Nora was standing fifth on the summoning circle when the light came up under the young man beside her and put a word over his hand. Hero. The court said it back to him. A bell started somewhere behind the throne, and 2 rows of men in blue went down on one knee at the same moment, as though they had rehearsed it. His name was Ethan. The light moved. It came up under the woman on his left and wrote Saint, and the robed section of the hall made a noise Nora had never heard a crowd make, half gasp and half cheer. That was Sarah. A minute before, she had been standing there with both hands over her mouth. Third was Great Mage. The woman at the end of the circle got that one, and an old man in the front row began writing and did not stop. Fourth was Holy Warrior. Hannah looked at her own hand, then at the floor, then at her hand again. Then the light came to Nora. It came up under her exactly the way it had come up under the other 4. The word it wrote was Tamer. The hall did not boo. It did not laugh either. It went back to looking at the other 4, and the noise it had been making for each of them simply did not start. And the quiet lasted long enough for her to understand that it was not going to. The word had not appeared to her alone. It stood over her hand in letters the whole room could read, which is why what came next happened in front of everyone instead of in a side office. A court official in gray came forward and looked at her hand for about as long as it takes to check a delivery against a list. He did not lower his voice for any of it. Tamer, he said, and then he told the hall what that was worth. The weakest job that exists. Helios had been losing its war for 2 years. It had cast the summoning as wide as its mages could make it, on the reasoning that a wide net could be sorted through afterwards. The sorting was happening now. Nobody asked her name. The record written up that afternoon listed 4 heroes and 1 Tamer. They discussed her while she stood there. Nobody moved her out of the room first, and nobody lowered a voice. The summoning had cost the treasury a figure the official read out. The 4 names it had produced were worth that figure, and the 5th was a line that would eat rations and return nothing. The tidy answer came up early, and it came up in plain words. She should be disposed of. King Aldric heard it out. Then he overruled it, and the reason he gave had nothing to do with her being a person. A kingdom that put down a girl it had dragged out of another world would be called barbaric, he said, and he could not afford to be called barbaric in the middle of a war he was already losing. He was not angry when he said it. He gave the ruling the way a man signs off on a grain figure, and then he gave the order himself, a purse from the household funds, an escort south to the edge of the realm where the Deepwood began. Release her there. Nobody in the hall corrected him. The southern edge of the realm produced the same outcome as the first proposal at no cost at all to the crown's name, and every person standing on that floor was old enough to work that out. One of them wrote it down. Nora spoke once. "Let me stay," she said. "I'll learn something, anything, or send me back." Nobody said no to her. Nobody answered her at all, because the official had already moved to the next item on the list, and the next item was where the 4 heroes would be housed. She did not ask again. Ethan watched her through all of it. The hero's word was still fresh over his hand, and he had been alive in this world for about 4 minutes, and he looked at her while the order was written down and while the ink was blotted. He did not say anything. Sarah put a hand out toward her and then took it back. Hannah looked at the floor. 2 soldiers came down the dais steps for her. They were not rough about it, which she noticed. At the door, a clerk handed her the purse without looking up from his book. The road south took 4 days. 2 soldiers, a driver, a cart with a canvas cover, and a bench she was allowed to sit on. They fed her twice a day, which was more than she had expected and less than she wanted. Neither soldier spoke to her, and by the second morning she had stopped trying because she had worked out that they had been told not to. The country changed as they went. Farmland with walls around it became farmland with no walls. Then the villages spread out, and then they ran out. On the 3rd afternoon, they passed the last of them, 30 roofs and a well in the middle, and a woman standing at the edge of it watched the cart go by and went back inside. On the 4th day, the road stopped being a road and became a track, and by midday, the track had given up as well. The driver turned the cart around before he stopped it, so it was already pointing north when the soldiers told her to get down. Neither of them looked at the tree line while they said it. They did not draw her a map. There was nothing on that side of the border to put on one. She waited until the cart was a small thing on the horizon before she opened the purse. The coin inside was Helios minting, the sun stamped on one face, and the king's profile on the other, and it was good money. There was nothing within a month's walk that would take it. Currency was regional here. The court had known that while it was counting the coins in, and she had not, and she understood it about 6 seconds after she pulled the string. She put the purse in her jacket pocket and left it there. Then she turned around once, slowly, and made a list of what she could see. Stone, running flat and gray and empty to the east, until the light gave up on it. Scrub, a tree line. No road behind her anymore, no roof in any direction, no smoke, and no water she could name. The forest in front of her was the reason the border sat where it sat. Helios had not stopped at the Deepwood because the land ran out. It had stopped there because of what came out of the Deepwood, and it had set her down on the wrong side of that line with a purse, so the record could say she had been provided for. She sat on a rock with her back to the trees and read her own status properly, for the first time, with nobody reading it over her shoulder. The first skill was called Certain Tame. 1 tame a day, guaranteed. No resistance check, no failure condition, no exceptions. It did not carry over to the next day, and it could not be saved. Ordinary taming, the slow kind with time and food and patience that every other tamer in the world used, was disabled for her entirely. She had 1 a day, and if she did not spend it, it was gone. The second skill was called Status Grant. Every creature she tamed added its endurance and its defense to her own body, permanently, whether the creature stayed with her afterwards or not. She read that one twice. The official in gray had appraised the first skill out loud in front of a hall. He had not appraised the second one at all because he had stopped reading at the word Tamer. The ground told her first. A tremor came up through the rock she was sitting on, small, regular, and getting closer together. She stood up. Out on the barrens, most of a mile off, a line of dust was coming toward her in a straight line, and whatever was raising it was not slowing down for the ground it crossed. It had 4 legs. It was moving faster than a horse, and it was not shaped like one, low and wide and heavy through the front, and the parts of it catching the last of the light were not scales. They were plates. Gray stone plates, dull and unpolished, laid over each other along its back and down the outsides of its legs. By the time she could make out the head, she could hear it. Each foot came down through the ground and up through her boots and into her knees, and the tremor stopped being a tremor and became something she could feel in her teeth. It was the size of a house. She did the arithmetic standing still, because there was nothing better to do with the time she had left. Running was not an option. It would cross the ground she could cover in a minute in about 4 seconds. Hiding was not an option either, because there was nothing on the barrens taller than her knee. The only thing she owned that worked at all was a skill with no failure condition, and the animal coming at her was made of exactly the material she had just been told she could wear. So she stayed where she was. She waited longer than she wanted to, because she did not know the range of the skill, and she was not going to learn it by guessing early. It came in with its head down. The dust it was pushing reached her before it did. When it was close enough that she could see the grain in the stone across its shoulder, she spent the day's tame. It stopped, not slowed, stopped, front feet planted, its whole weight coming down into the rock, close enough that she could have put a flat hand on its jaw without stepping forward. The dust went past her and kept going. Grit went into her mouth and her eyes, and she did not close them. Then nothing moved at all. The shaking in the ground was gone. She could hear the wind again, and under the wind she could hear the animal breathing, slow, the way something that size breathes when it is in no hurry. Whatever had been in its face while it was crossing the barrens was not in it anymore. She put her hand on its jaw. The plate was warm from the day and rough as a wall. Something changed in her arms and her back while she stood there, a thickening, a weight settling in that had not been in her a minute earlier, and she did not need anyone to tell her what it was. She sat down on the stone, hard, and stayed there until her hands stopped shaking. Then she said it out loud, to nobody, the weakest job that exists. She slept against its flank, because it was the only structure she owned. In the morning, it had not moved. It let her get up off it, waited while she stood there working out that she was still alive, then walked a short way onto the barrens and ate a rock. Then it ate several more. That solved the problem of feeding it. It made the other problem worse, because she could not eat rock, and she had eaten nothing since another world. Sitting with her back against a warm stone leg, she worked out the rule properly. 1 tame a day. It arrived whether she wanted it or not, and it left at the end of the day whether she used it or not. And there was no version of the skill that let her hold 2. A bad choice did not cost her a creature. It cost her a day, and she had no idea yet how many days she had. The dragon ate. She made a list. Shelter she had, if an animal counted as shelter. Water and food were both on the other side of the tree line. In the forest, a kingdom had stopped building up. She went in at midday with the day's tame unspent, planning to spend it on the first thing she found that could fetch food. The trees went up higher than any tree she had seen. The canopy closed over her head inside 20 paces, and the light that got through was green and never sat still. There was water a little way in, a thin stream running over stone. She drank there and did not linger. She stayed within sight of the tree line on purpose, and she counted every turn she made. The fruit was about 200 paces in, low trees, heavy with something round and dark red, and the ground under them churned up by animals that had been getting there first. One of those animals came down a trunk behind her while she was reaching up, and it was the size of a small car. 8 legs, a low flat body carried close against the bark, and it moved without making any sound at all. It went past her and took a smaller creature that had reached the fallen fruit ahead of it, and the whole thing was over in one movement. Then it turned what passed for a head and looked at her. She did not run. She had learned the evening before what running was worth out here, and it was between her and the way out. It held the look for a while. Then it went back to what it was doing. She worked out why while she was standing there, and the answer was not that it had spared her. It had already fed. She was work, and it had no reason to do any more work that day. 2 fruits, she took 2, and she backed out of the trees without turning around. And 2 fruits was the whole of the day's food. The tame went unspent. She felt it go some time after dark, and that was the first time the rule cost her anything. She had walked into a forest to hire a worker and had walked out with fruit. Crossing the stone on the way back, she made the decision for the morning. Whatever she hired next was going to fetch. She ate the last of the fruit at first light and went back to the same trees. Calling out for it was stupid, and she knew that while she was doing it. Nothing answered. The small foragers on the ground moved away from her and kept their heads down, and the noise that had been in the canopy the day before was not in it. The strike came from above with nothing in front of it. It was aimed at her neck. It landed, and it did almost nothing. She went sideways into a tree trunk, and the place it hit stung hard, the way a slap stings, and that was the whole of it. Nothing had gone through. She was stung. She was still standing. It took her a second to work out that this was true, and considerably longer to believe it. 2 miles away on the barrens, an animal that ate rocks was asleep and had just saved her life without being present. The day before, that same strike would have killed her, and it would have been quick about it. She spent the day's tame while it was still on top of her. The weight came off immediately. It backed up 2 steps, folded its legs under it, and waited, and everything that had been in it a second earlier was gone. Up close, it ran about 7 feet across with the legs out, built for ambush and for not being seen. Forelimbs sharp enough to do what it had just tried to do. No web and no venom. A coat that shed water. A body worth a great deal in cover and nothing at all in the open. She said thank you out loud to a dragon 2 miles away that could not hear her. Then she put a hand on the thing that had just tried to kill her, and it pushed up into her palm the way a cat does. She had a predator that could ambush anything in that forest, and she did not keep it as a bodyguard. She told it to go and bring back meat. It went. No hesitation, no looking back. She stood in the churned ground under the fruit trees with her neck stinging and understood that she had just put something on staff. The rest of the afternoon went on gathering fruit and thinking about fire, which she did not have. The spider came back after dark, dragging something boar-shaped that outweighed it. She had it cut the meat because its forelimbs were better than anything she owned, and she owned nothing. Then she sat down in front of the meat and worked out whether she could eat it raw. The animal had been warm when it died, and the things out here seemed to run hot, which she counted in favor. There was nothing visible in it that moved. There was no fire, no pot, no way to make either, and no second option. She decided the risk was acceptable, and she ate it. It was not good. She chewed a great deal and thought hard about other things while she did. The rest went to the spider. It ate normally, sitting on the stone a few feet away with its legs folded under it, and that was reassuring in a way she did not examine. The rock dragon came back late. It put its head down near the 2 of them, looked at the spider for a while without any particular opinion about it, and went to sleep. She read that as acceptance, because the alternative was staying awake about it. Before she slept, she made the list, because lists were working better than not making lists. No clothing except what she had arrived in, which was already filthy. No shelter except an animal. Nothing to write on, nothing to write with, and no fire, which was the one that kept coming back. I need fire, she said to the spider. Tomorrow, or the day after. Something that can make fire. It looked at her with more eyes than she wanted to count, and did not answer, because it could not. Lying down against the dragon, she set the order in her head. A forager with hands first, because hands were the thing she was missing most. Then fire. Then something that could carry weight. On the 3rd morning, she went deeper on purpose. The spider could kill and cut and carry, and it could not tie a knot or hold a tool or work a fastening. She had watched it try to pick up a single fruit and give the job up. She wanted hands. Past the margin she had been working, the trees came closer together and the ground went soft, and the noise changed. Fewer small things and further further between. She kept counting her turns. She went further in than she had ever been and knew exactly how far that was. What she found was standing upright. It was heavy through the shoulders and taller than her by a head, green-gray, and it carried a club it had made rather than found. It saw her at the same moment she saw it, and it came at her without any pause for consideration. She did not run, and she did not wait to find out how fast it was. She spent the day's tame before it had covered half the distance. It stopped with the club still up. Then it lowered the club and stood there with its arms at its sides, waiting to be told something. She did not know what it was called. What she could see was that it had made its own clothing, and that the knots holding it together were tied properly, with fingers, by someone who had thought about the problem first. That was the entire reason she wanted it. 3 days on the wrong side of the border. One dragon, one spider, one thing with hands. No fire, no walls, no roof, and a purse of good coin that nothing out here would take. She did not plan on going back. She was not going to ask Helios for anything, and Helios had already stopped thinking about her. On the 4th morning, the orc came back from the trees before she was properly awake, carrying fruit in the fold of its own vest, and not one piece of it was bruised. It put the load down where she pointed. Then it separated the pieces so none of them were touching, which she had not asked for, and went to the runoff to wash its hands. "You're better at this than I am," she told it. It waited to see whether there was an instruction attached. When there wasn't, it went back to the fruit. That was the difference she had missed. The dragon did what it was told. The spider did what it was told. Well, and the same way every time. The orc did what it was told, and then had opinions about the method, which meant she had not been controlling anything out here. She had been running a staff of 3, with no fire, no roof, and nothing to write a roster on. She gave out the day's work: meat for the spider, more fruit for the orc, and a look at the ground east of the camp while it was out there. Then she went to find out what she was actually standing on. The dragon covered ground faster than a horse and did not appear to notice she was on it. For 2 hours, there was nothing beneath them but broken stone, the same color in every direction. No water, nothing living on it big enough to see. Then the gray went pale, and the pale went to grit, and a long way south, the ground turned to desert, with heat coming off it in sheets. She marked where it was and turned back, because the day's tame was still unspent, and there was nothing out here worth spending it on. It expired at midnight, unused. That was the first day she had lost on purpose, instead of by mistake, and the price was acceptable. She now knew the desert was 2 hours out, and roughly which way. She got back to find the orc asleep sitting upright, on guard, club across its knees, the fruit untouched in front of it. That one she let go. Nobody had been robbed. An hour later, the spider came out of the trees at a fast walk, carrying something in its forelimbs the way it carried meat. The something was shouting. "Put him down," she said. It put him down. He landed on his feet, shorter than her by a head and about twice as wide, beard forked and tied, a leather harness of small tools strapped across his chest and not hurt anywhere she could see. He got the beard out of his face, looked around him, and stopped dead at what was lying behind her. "That is a rock dragon." "It is." He took 3 steps toward it before he remembered she was there. "Whose?" "Mine." He introduced himself without taking his eyes off it. "Walter. Materials gatherer, 150 years old, from a village half a day west, and he had gone too deep, chasing a vein of something, and been picked up like a sack of grain." He did not appear to hold that against anyone. "You'd be selling scale," he said. It was not a question. Would I? What he offered came out fast and in order. Worked iron, cloth, tools, cooking gear, furniture, blades, all of it made by his own people, against dragon scale and whatever the Deepwood grew. She had a purse of coin. Nothing within a month's walk would take it. The only thing she owned that anybody wanted was lying behind her with its eyes shut, and a man had just walked out of the trees offering her a house for it. Her face did not move. She asked him what a village that size could actually deliver. They went through it standing up in the dark for an hour, and the whole time she was aware of how badly she wanted him to keep talking. It had been a long time since anything she spoke to could answer back. At some point, he stopped and looked at her properly. No gear, no escort, no cart, camped on the wrong side of the Deepwood with 3 monsters and shoes that were coming apart. "Nobody's out here because they chose it," he said. And then he asked whether she could get scale off the underside as well as the back. He never asked what she had done. He never asked who had put her there. Neither did anyone who came after him. The chief came the next day with Walter and a handcart. He walked past the rock dragon the way a man walks past a burning building, quickly and without looking at it, and then he stood in front of her and did not waste her time. His people had been driven out of the mountain holds 2 generations back. They lived where they lived because nobody else contested the ground. They had smiths and no market and no allies and nothing to bargain with. The offer was a whole standard of living against Deepwood material and rock dragon parts. Nora agreed to it in about 4 seconds and then rewrote it. Not by weight and not by count, she told him. You bring what you think is fair. You take what you think is fair. I'm not weighing your cart and you're not weighing mine. Walter had started to say something about that being generous. She was not finished. One rule: if I find out someone has cheated me, I stop trading with the village. Not with the man, with the village. That's the whole of it. She said it at the same speed as everything else, without leaning on any part of it, and then moved straight to the next item, which was clothes. The chief did not answer for a moment. Then he took all of it, and afterwards he looked at her a little differently, and so did Walter, and neither of them mentioned it. Packing up, he asked whether he might have one of the fruits, because he had walked half a day and eaten nothing. She told the orc to give him 3, and called it a bonus. That day's tame she spent in the desert. The thing she took was the length of a cart, and armored over every inch of it, with claws that could have taken her arm off at the shoulder, and a spine over its back that beaded wet when it moved. It watched them come in and did not so much as lift the claws. Nothing out there read her as a threat because of what she was standing next to. She had not gone looking for a guard. She had gone looking for haulage. It could carry 4 times what the orc could and walk all day on ground hot enough to cook on, and she had been moving everything she owned by hand since the day she got there. On the ride home, she worked out where the harness straps would have to sit and added it to the order. The next day, she went into the forest to survey it, rather than to eat off it. Half an hour in, the undergrowth thickened and the trees changed scale. Trunks she could not have got her arms a third of the way around. She filled a basket with fruit and berries she did not recognize and marked where they grew. Somewhere past that, she was being watched. She stopped. The scorpion stopped, turned its front end through a slow half circle, and found nothing, and its senses were better than hers by a distance. Going back would have taught her nothing, so she kept going, and she kept the day's tame unspent in case the thing showed itself. It was still on her when she came out. Whatever it was had watched her the entire way in and the entire way out, and had never once moved. The tame expired at midnight for the 2nd time that week. By then, she disliked being watched considerably more than she disliked losing the day. She went in again the following afternoon and got about a mile further before something came through the undergrowth at her. It was upright, it was 3 times her height, and it had 1 eye. She spent the tame before she had finished looking at it. The arm stopped halfway up and then came down. A forest cyclops, as it turned out. It could throw something out of that eye that scorched a line across the ground, and it preferred to punch, because punching was faster. Timber then. It put 2 trees down while she watched, stripped them, and carried both of them out under 1 arm, along with the day's foraging without slowing down. And on the way out, she felt it again. The same attention, from the same direction, while the Cyclops walked beside her in plain sight. So it had never been the Cyclops. The Cyclops ate more that night than the other 3 put together, and then looked around for more. She recalculated the food supply on the spot, and moved the spider up to 2 carcasses a day. Then she sat on the stone and did the arithmetic she had been putting off. The nights were getting colder. The trees would not fruit forever. She had no walls, and nothing anywhere on the payroll that made heat. Winter, she said, to nobody in particular, and the orc looked up. In the morning, she was going back for whatever was watching her. It was the only item on the list she could not put a number against. She rode back to the exact stretch where she had felt it both times, and stood there most of the morning, doing nothing. Nothing came. Nothing moved that should not have. So she stopped waiting for the watcher to show itself, and started going through what was already there, trunk by trunk. One of them was wrong. Its lower branches were thicker than the branches above them, which was the wrong way round. It carried more fruit than anything near it, and the ground at its base was bare, where every other trunk in that stand had a skirt of saplings and weed crowded up against it. She looked at it a while longer, to be certain she was not inventing the difference. Then she spent the tame on it. The tree stopped being a tree. The whole mass of it shifted, roots dragging clear of the soil like fingers coming out of a pocket, and it turned to face her and waited to be told something. A Trent. It had been standing in that stand, watching everything that walked through, and it had never come at her because she had never come close enough. It could not haul. It could not fight worth anything. It moved at the speed of a slow walk. What it did was grow fruit. She filed it as the least impressive thing she had ever hired and rode home. She came out of the trees at noon to find her camp full of dwarves, 10 of them, plus Walter, plus a cart loaded past the sideboards. They had brought their own food and their own tools because they intended to be there half a month. They were building her a house. Nobody had asked her whether she wanted one. The cart came off in stacks. Cooking gear, plates, cups, a kettle, cloth and clothing folded into oilskin, 4 blades and a hand axe, all of it serviceable, a pack with proper straps, rope, a whetstone. She paid with the largest scale the dragon had shed, and as many broken fragments as they could carry, and then placed the next order. Harnesses for the scorpion and the cyclops, a farming kit, spices, which she said twice, to be sure it had been written down. The blades went out that same afternoon. The orc took a mace and a short sword, and had worked out the grip on both inside a minute. The cyclops got a polearm, which in its hands was a heavy stick with a knife on the end. She kept a knife and a bar of iron for herself. Her new clothes stayed folded. There was no point putting clean cloth on a body in that condition. Then, because 10 dwarves had spent the whole morning staring at the rock dragon and pretending not to, she put every one of them on its back at once and took them out over the barrens. They screamed the entire way. Walter laughed so hard when they landed that he had to sit down on the rock. It was, by a wide margin, the most fun anybody in that region had had in years. The last thing off the cart was a stove. It was iron, and it was heavier than the cart that had carried it, and it took 4 of them to set it down on ground that had been bare rock 9 days earlier. They leveled it with flat stones, and the stones went under it with a sound like a door closing. Walter opened the little door in the front, put in a fired stone about the size of a fist, and stepped back. The flame caught low and blue, then went up yellow, and the light of it went across the rock and up the side of the rock dragon and out over ground that had never had a fire on it. Nora stood in front of it and did not say anything for a while. Somebody set a pan on the top. Somebody else came past her with meat, cut thin, and it went on. And the sound it made was a sound she had not heard in 8 days. Not an animal, not wind, not her own voice talking at something that could not answer. Just fat on hot iron. The smell arrived a second later and went through her like a hand. She had eaten raw meat for 8 days and had told herself every one of those days that it was fine. It had not been fine. The heat came off the front of the stove onto her face and her hands, and she stayed exactly where she was, close enough that it was nearly too much, while the dwarves worked around her and left her alone, and nobody said one word to her about it. Then Walter put a plate in her hands. She ate sitting on the stone with 11 people around her, all of them talking at once, and none of them about her. There was a second plate. That one she ate with both hands and did not care who saw it. And when the meat ran out, somebody produced something to drink, and the noise got louder, and the fire kept going. And it went on being warm long after there was nothing left to cook. That night, she did not sleep against the dragon. She slept next to the stove. By morning, the frame was up, because the Cyclops had produced more timber in 1 day than 10 dwarves could get through in 3. Walter came to find her while she was handing out the day's work, and what he had to say took under a minute and changed the shape of everything. The fruit off her tree was a luxury in human cities, the kind of thing that reached a table once a year. He told her the price twice, because she did not believe it the first time. And the scorpion's venom was what apothecaries bought to make medicine, by weight, all year round, at whatever they were asked. She had been walking past both of them for a week. Then the chief raised the other matter, which was that some of his people wanted to live here. Not visit, live. Their reasoning was flat and practical. Nothing had attacked the site once since they arrived, and where they came from, something attacked every month. Nora walked them east of the stone and drew a line with her boot. Everything past it was theirs. Everything behind it was hers and her creatures. She had no right whatsoever to give away a single foot of that ground, and there was nobody within a month's walk who could tell her so. How many would you take? Walter asked. All of them. She was already looking at the next thing on the list. Bring anyone who wants to come. I'm not doing this on my own again. It came out in the same voice she had used to order the harnesses, and then she went back to work. On his way back to the frame, Walter mentioned the dungeon. He said it the way a man mentions a well. There was a gate about 10 minutes into the trees, north and east, and had she been down it yet? She had walked within a few minutes of that thing every day for a week. He took her out to it. It stood upright in a clearing, a black ring taller than the orc, and perfectly round, with nothing holding it up and nothing behind it. The trees on the far side simply gone and replaced by dark. Walter knocked his knuckles on the rim, entirely unbothered, and told her the inside rearranges itself every time, which is why the ones near the surface kill people. She took the orc, its mace, and its sword, and went in the same day. Inside was a corridor of broken brick that lit itself, cold blue seeping out of the joints, running off in 3 directions with nothing to say which was which. They took the widest, and 40 paces down, something was waiting. It was tall and robed, and it was made of bone, and the air in front of it was cold enough to see. The head came around. The orc got its blade up. Nora spent the days tame before either of them had taken another step. The cold went out of the corridor all at once. It came to her, folded itself down, and waited. And up close, it was plainly the most dangerous thing she owned, and just as plainly the most intelligent. It cast ice. It fed on the mana in the air, so it did not eat at all. Its hands worked as well as hers did. The day's tame was gone 1 minute into her first dungeon, which ended the descent on the spot. She walked back out with it and was not sorry. It made ice in a heap on the stone, on request, as much as she wanted. She had it fill everything the dwarves had brought that would hold water and put a pot of it on the stove. And while that melted, she worked out what she had actually hired. Not a weapon, a water supply. She had been drinking what she could get off leaves at first light since the day she arrived. Behind the house frame, with a cloth and a pot of warm water, she washed. It took 3 changes of water before it ran anything like clean. Then she put on the clothes she had left folded the day before, a shirt and trousers cut for somebody shorter and wider than her. All of it new, none of it hers, all of it clean. The dwarves asked whether they were allowed to look at the ice caster. She said yes, within limits. They took the limits extremely seriously and looked at it for an hour. She sat by the stove afterwards with her hair wet and made the list for the morning. A shield, the biggest they could hammer out. She could not fight and was not going to learn, so her job down that corridor was to stand in front and let the staff work. Guards for the orc's forearms. Nothing for her own body, because nothing had managed to mark it yet. Behind her, the frame went up black against the sky, and the fire was still going, and there were 11 people asleep on ground that had been empty stone when she got there. In the morning, she had a whole slot to spend, and she knew exactly where the door was. The dwarves finished the shield at dusk, and by the middle of the next day, she was standing behind it in a doorway with a room full of skeletons trying to get past her. She had handed out the day's work before she went down, and nobody had needed any of it explained. Meat for the spider, timber for the cyclops, the scorpion out east on the harness run. 11 days in, the camp ran most of a morning without her in it. The corridors on the way down were nothing. The orc took the ones that came singly and did not break stride to do it. At the end of the second corridor was a room packed wall to wall. She got the shield into the gap where the arch had fallen through and stood in it, and the whole room came at her at once. The orc worked in from the left. The ice caster pulled the temperature down until the ones at the back moved like they were walking uphill. Behind the iron, she got her shoulder in low and braced. Faster! Very little about the next few minutes was dignified. She shouted at both of them twice, put her head down behind the iron, and yelled hurry up into it while the shield rang like a struck bell. 10 minutes, start to finish. Then the floor went quiet, and the orc came round the front to check on her. She was upright, gray to the elbows with dust, and unmarked. Not a cut on her, not a bruise. Past the last of them, the chamber narrowed, and there was a chest sitting in it. She had the orc open it at arm's length, while she lay flat on the stone behind the shield with her eyes shut, which she considered proportionate. Nothing happened. Inside was one thing, a plain dark band, no stone in it, no decoration on it at all. The appraisal ran long, and she read it twice. The band raised undead. It raised as many as the wearer wanted, whenever the wearer wanted, and it came off nobody's wrist once it had gone on. Every raising was paid for out of the wearer's remaining years. Nora stood there a moment, working out which part of that was the trap, and it was all of it. A person who put that on would spend the rest of a life a few months at a time and would never be able to stop spending, which was exactly why it was still lying in a hole in the ground with nothing guarding it. It had been found before. It had never once been kept. Then she turned and looked at the thing standing beside her, fleshless and patient and faintly frosted over. "You don't have any," she said. "Years. You have got none of those to spend." It took the band, turned it over once, and put it on. 11 skeletons came up out of the corridor floor without anybody asking for them, apparently to confirm the thing worked. She told it to send them up the stairs to Walter and stop showing off. She came back the next morning for the other one. They had seen it on the way out, a second robed figure standing on its own with a different weight to it, and she had left it there because the day was spent. This time, she came in with the day still on her. It saw them coming and raised a force. Hers raised one back. The two lines stood across the hall from each other, matched down to the count, and then nothing whatsoever happened. Neither side moved for a full minute. Both of them were clever enough to have done the arithmetic, and neither of them liked the answer. She ended the war by hiring the opposition. The relief came off both sides of that hall like heat. Its summons stopped mid-step and stood down. The thing itself walked over, and the appraisal told her what she had just picked up. It did not cast. It made. It pulled ambient mana in and turned it out as permanent undead on a daily schedule, several a day, in tiers. And it had been doing that in an empty hall for centuries because nothing ever came down here, and there was nothing else to do with the time. The room she had nearly been buried under 2 days before was its output, not a trap, a backlog. On the way up, she decided what it was for, not soldiers, labor. Everything it made went to the fields, the hauling and the build. The dwarves lost their minds over it. They came out of the half-built house and off the frame and across the stone at a run to get a look, and the thing that had ruled an empty hall for centuries stood in the middle of 11 delighted dwarves, being asked questions, visibly regretting the whole arrangement. Dinner was something the spider had brought back, cut thin and grilled with salt. By the time she was finished eating, there were skeleton crews working the housing pads by firelight, and they were still working when she woke up. Walter came in at first light with 20 dwarves and a loaded cart, and he was off it before it stopped rolling. The cart had harnesses for the scorpion and the cyclops, sacks of seed, farming tools, a crate of spices, and a book on agriculture that somebody had thought to bring without being asked. "We voted," he told her, thumb over his shoulder at the 20 behind him. "All of us, 60, counting the ones too old to carry anything." She asked whether he was certain. He said he was. An hour later, she asked again, and he said he was, in the tone of a man who does not intend to be asked a third time. So she stopped asking and started counting beds instead. 11 days ago, she had been alone on this stone with a knife and a bar of iron. Temporary housing went up inside a day, dwarves framing and skeleton crews carrying. Her own house, Walter reckoned, was 10 days out. She took him down to see what she had hired underground, and by the time they came back up, they were planning tool sets and equipment for crews that did not eat, sleep, or stop, which meant ore. There was no ore yet. 2 mornings later, she went up on the griffin she had taken the week before to look at the forest properly from above and found holes in it, circular clearings, a dozen of them, punched through the canopy in a rough line running north. Nothing had felled the trees. The ground in them was bare and slightly sunken, and there were no stumps. The cause was at the head of the line, moving at about the speed of a slow walk, a mass of translucent fluid the size of a cottage, going through standing timber the way water goes through sugar. She spent the day on it. What she got for the day was a landscaping crew. Its fluid did more than dissolve. It could run as clean water, or as solvent, or as something that soaked into ground and fed it, and it would eat anything put in front of it and never fill up. The dwarves were terrified of it for most of an afternoon. Then, somebody worked out what a bucket of the clean version was worth in a village with no well, and by evening, there was a queue. She put it on the barrens with the rock dragon, dissolve the crust, level it, and pack it down behind. Farmland, where there had been broken stone. Then, the fortnight happened. Walter came back with 30 more and the workshops. Not the tools out of the workshops. The workshops cut off their foundations and carried whole across half a day of country on skeleton crews and a scorpion, set down on level ground, roofs still on them. 3 days of patching, and the settlement could make its own weapons, its own tools, its own armor, and stopped waiting on deliveries for anything. 90 people now, and every one of them was doing something. She restructured the whole payroll into squads with jobs written next to them: defense and land clearing, meat procurement, transport, a labor pool that reported to Walter and did whatever the build needed that day. She enjoyed the afternoon she spent on that more than anything she had done underground. The first fields went in on the barren side, marked out by dwarves and worked by crews that did not need to be fed or rested, and the soil turned out to be extraordinary. Seed put in on a Tuesday was up by the weekend. Nobody could explain it. The best guess anyone had was mana in the ground, the treant standing at the edge of it, and the runoff the slime left behind. Fruit was coming off the treant faster than the crew could crate it, and that was the thing she had written off as the least impressive she owned. Nora made a private note about that, and about the maker in the hall she had nearly walked past, and revised her opinion of her own judgment downward. Food was ahead of demand for the first time. She made a policy of it. Everyone eats properly. Nobody preserves stock against a bad month. The bad month was not coming. On the 20th day, she stood on the rise north of it with a sheet of paper in her hand and looked back at the thing. 15 buildings up, 4 dwarves to a house. Permanent construction started on 2 more. Fields going in along the Barren's edge, with crews working them in rows. Smoke from 3 chimneys that had not existed a fortnight ago, and the noise of a workshop coming across open ground. That was the ground Helios had picked for her because nobody comes back from it. 60 people had voted to move onto it, and 30 more had followed them, and all of them were going to sleep on it that night. Then she got back to the paper because the zoning was wrong. Walter fixed it in about 4 minutes. Put the workshops along the forest side, he said, stone walls and iron shutters, and nobody sleeping in them. And they stop being workshops and start being a wall. Housing behind that. Everything after this grows away from the trees, not toward them. That's better than mine, she said. He accepted this as his due and drew it out along the edge of the paper with a carpenter's pencil. The ground directly behind her house she marked off and would not budge on. That was for her creatures, and nobody built on it, ever. It had not rained once in 20 days, and she wanted a roof over them anyway. Last on the paper was a road running north out of the settlement, wide, straight, with lots either side of it. Walter asked what was going on the lots. She tapped them with the blunt end of the pencil. Shops. There were no shopkeepers. There was nobody within a month's walk to open one. She drew the road anyway and told him the 2 things the place did not have were residents and a way to earn money. And he said that as it happened, a merchant was coming. Hundreds of miles north, 4 people rode out of the capital with an escort and did not look back at it. 10 days of training had put them past men who had been at it for a year. That was not an opinion anybody held quietly. Their instructor had suggested a duke's territory further north, where the dungeons were and where nobody would be watching them fail. And Ethan had put it to the other 2 over breakfast, and Sarah and Hannah had agreed before he finished the sentence. They went north. The Deepwood was south and got further away with every hour they rode, and none of them thought about the direction at all. Ethan did think about the 5th person on that circle. He had been turning it over for 10 days and had got as far as this. She had not been executed. The king was far too careful a man for blood, and blood in the capital would have been untidy and public and expensive, and there were quieter ways to lose someone. So she was alive somewhere, and nobody had said so out loud, and nobody had asked. And a job the whole world had already decided was worthless, handed to somebody dragged across from another world by a summoning that cost a kingdom a year of preparation, was exactly the kind of thing that turns out later not to have been worthless at all. He hoped, if it ever came to standing in the same room again, that they were standing on the same side of it. He said none of it to Sarah, and none of it to Hannah. Nobody in the capital had said her name out loud since the ruling, and he did not say it either. He was 19 years old and outranked by every single person who had spoken in that hall. The road climbed. The party crested the rise, went down the far side, and the country closed over behind them. Back south, the spider's runs started coming back light. 90 people eat 90 people's worth of food, and the forest within a day of the settlement had noticed. She checked the numbers with Walter twice and did not like either version, so she went and got more land. The first floor was already confirmed dead ground. What was killed there stayed killed, which made it a corridor and not a farm. 1 flight down was open grassland to the horizon, warm, lit by nothing she could find, with herds standing on it. Large animals in numbers that made the orc stop walking to stare. Whatever that floor did to keep itself stocked, it did faster than anything could be taken off it. There was also a gate at the stairhead, the kind that could be linked and stepped through, which solved the hour's walk home. 4 boars came out of the grass at her at a flat run and put her on the ground and went over the top of her. Her staff dealt with them. She got up, checked herself, found nothing wrong, and went back to what she had been saying. Then she spent the day on the largest centaur in sight and made it responsible for hunts. 2 carcasses went home through the gate that evening. Food was solved permanently, and the forest was allowed to refill. The 3rd floor was a battlement, walled high on both sides, with nothing past the parapet but dark. Patrolling it were suits of armor with nobody inside them, working in pairs. She had the orc test 1 pair rather than finish it, which was not a thing she had ever thought to do before. They blocked. They shield bashed. When one was pressed, the other came around the flank without being told. She watched that for a minute, decided she had learned what she needed, and told the orc to stop holding back. It was over in the time it took to say so. The next pair she spent the day on instead, and took one whole sword and shield and all. Appraisal on the metal came back deep sea steel, and she did not know what that meant until she carried the shield into the workshop row and put it on a bench. Walter went white, then loud. There were two pieces of it in the known world. One sword in a royal treasury that had been paid for with a province. One ingot that a dwarf hold kept as a crown jewel and had never worked, because nobody was willing to be the one who cut it. The settlement had a floor of it, 10 minutes into the trees, patrolling itself in pairs and putting itself back every day. She sent the orc and the centaur straight back down. They were home inside the hour carrying armor, sword, and shield, and Walter had to sit on a crate for a while. That night, she sat down with a slate to write the next day's list and got stuck on the top line because she had two liches now, and both of their proper designations ran to 11 syllables and differed by one word in the middle. She had been calling the wrong one for 3 days, so she named them. The one that cast ice, she called Frost. The one that made things, she called Mason. Neither of them raised any objection, and she carried on down the list. 20 days past the border, there were 90 people on that stone, 15 buildings, and 2 more going up. Fields coming in on ground that had been broken rock, a workshop row that could arm all of them, an ocean of grass under the forest that would feed them forever, and a supply of the most valuable metal in the world downstairs, putting itself back together every night. In the morning, she had 1 tame to spend, a road to start, and a merchant on his way. The next morning, Nora went out onto the barrens with the slime and the rock dragon, because she had eaten the same 3 things for 16 days and was finished with all of them. Officially, the job was widening the leveled ground west of the fields. The slime went first, taking the crust down to something a road could sit on, and the rock dragon pressed the result flat. Then the slime stopped. There was a rectangle in the ground where the crust had been. Everything around it had gone, and it had not. It had a frame, a lintel, and a plain iron ring set into it near the top. She told the dragon to wait, got both hands on the ring, and pulled. On the other side of the door, there was white sand, and past the sand, open water all the way out. She stood in the frame with the barrens at her back, smelled salt, and said nothing for a moment. Then she stepped through. Something came out of the water at her. It was fast, and it was very large, and one arm of it was already coming down when she spent the day's tame on it. The arm stopped above her head and stayed there, a kraken. She had done the same to the rock dragon on her first day past the tree line, in the same second, with the same reflex. It could not fit through the door. The door frame was a door frame, and the kraken was the size of a barn, so it stayed on the seaside. Then it brought her a fish. The fish was a mouthful to it. She could not lift the thing, and the dragon carried it home. Inside the hour, the dwarves had a rota, 2 of them out to the beach every morning for whatever the kraken had left there. Walking back, she paced the distance and started planning a road. The town ate fish that night and would not shut up about it. Marcus of Alberia arrived the next morning, and he did not arrive quietly. 10 wagons, each big enough to need 4 animals. An escort in matched kit, front and back, professional and bored. He came down off the lead wagon before it stopped and introduced himself to the entire settlement at a volume nobody had to be near him to hear. Walter had described him in advance as money mad, but reasonable. Nothing slowed him down. He went past the skeleton crew carrying roof timber without breaking stride, and the only thing he remarked on was the road, which did not exist yet, and which he said was in exactly the right place. Then he walked into the hut borrowed for the meeting, sat at the head of the table, and started talking prices before anyone else was through the door. Walter went first. Ore, gems, fuel, drink, paid for in dwarf-made tools, and Marcus named a price that made Walter sit back and stop being suspicious. Then it was her turn. Plant seed, every kind he could get, livestock, breeding stock, not meat, and people who knew how to work both, because she had labor, and labor was not a farmer. He asked what she was paying with. She put 3 things on the table: a plate off a living armor, which he recognized before she said a word, a jar of traint sap, a claw off the rock dragon, which took both her hands to get onto the boards. Marcus stopped talking. It went on a while. "How much of this can you get?" he asked, still looking at the plate. "As much as you can move." When he started again, he was not loud anymore. He wanted an exclusive. Everything the settlement ever sold went through him alone, and in exchange, he funded the build. Signed that day. She had been thinking about it since he priced the sap sap without asking where it came from. One buyer meant one root, one set of books, and one living man who knew there was a floor of deep-sea steel 10 minutes into the trees. 10 buyers meant 10 of him. The exclusive was not a favor, it was a lid. Then she added terms. Development funded out of the first shipment, nothing leaving without her word on it, and people brought in on every run for a year. Walter said, in front of Marcus, that he would not double-cross her. She took his word for it and signed. He could carry it too. He was a Margrave first and a merchant second. His roads, his soldiers, and his own man on the customs post. That night, with the flap down and the lamp lit, Marcus asked his guard captain for an assessment. Not an opinion, an assessment. A giant on the timberline, 2 suits of plate on sentry with nobody inside them, something the size of a cottage out on the flats, a lich in the fields, my lord, giving orders. The captain let that sit, and a girl in ordinary clothes walking through the middle of it with no guard. He asked the question he wanted answered. If the crown demanded tribute, she would refuse, the captain said. If the crown sent an army, the army would not come home. Without a special rank, or the hero himself, we do not have the assets. I would not send 5,000 into that. He did the arithmetic out loud, because the captain was the only person he could do it in front of. Report her, the crown demanded. She refused, and his kingdom lost a war on his own border. Or the crown took her another way. The goods stopped, and he had a burnt frontier and nothing to sell. No version of it paid, so he was not going to report her. He said it plainly, in his own tent, to his own captain. He was going to deceive his country. The captain named what that word meant. Marcus agreed and asked for the ledger. Then the listing started. Development materials, technicians, officials who could keep books, workers, as many as would come, a road south. Buy the neighboring land in every direction, so nobody could reach her without crossing ground he owned. Nothing about that settlement would travel the southern road unless he carried it. He put the pen down and said it had been the best day of his life. He was not smiling when he said it. 2 days later, she took the Griffin east, further out over the ashlands than she had ever gone. Gray stone, gray grit, no water, and a horizon that did not change for an hour at a time. Then, a long way off, a castle. She took it for a heat shimmer and turned toward it, and it went solid. Backing off, she watched it thin and disappear. Forward, and it came back. She did that 3 times to be sure, and then she landed. Close up, it was derelict. Half the roof was down. The courtyard flags were split with grass through them, and the main gate hung off one hinge. She went in. Inside, it was spotless. Not tidy, spotless. The floors were swept, and the windows had been cleaned recently enough that the light came through them properly. In the kitchen, the ranges were cold, and every pot hung in order of size. In the hall, the chairs were pushed in. Upstairs, the beds were made, all of them, covers straight. She went through it room by room and touched nothing. There was nobody in any of them. At the end of the top corridor, one door was left. She opened it. There was a man off the ground in the middle of the room, and he opened his eyes. He came down onto the floor without hurrying and gave her his name and the title the world had given him, the way another man gives a trade. Solomon, great demon lord. Then he asked whether she was a hero. She told him she was a tamer. That earned a long look. He said she should not be able to stand where she was standing, and he was not threatening her when he said it. He was working something out, and whatever it was why he kept talking instead of putting her outside. Was there anyone else in the castle? She said no. He asked it again in different words, and the second version was the one he cared about. Were the rooms in use? Had she seen anyone at all on the way up? She told him the truth, because it did not occur to her to do anything else. Beds made, nothing touched. Every room empty. Something went out of him then. It was not dramatic. He simply stopped standing the way he had been standing. Then he asked her to leave, courteously, warned her about the wards under the castle and the things sleeping in them, and closed the door. She stood in the corridor outside his door for a moment and felt it. She was not made of stone. Whatever had just happened to that man had happened in front of her, and she had been the one who told him. Then she went down the stairs to the wards, because she still had a tame she had not spent. The chamber ran on further than her light. Circles were cut into the floor at intervals, and inside each one something was sleeping, not pinned, not held down, stopped, and waiting, and breathing. Near the stair, she picked a red ogre, because it was the biggest thing she could see the whole of. It came awake slowly, stood up inside its circle, and she took it before it was properly upright, and told it they would come back for the others. She came back 6 days later for another one, and this time he did not hide. He was standing at her shoulder when she turned around, and she went backwards into a pillar hard enough to hurt it. He had done it on purpose, and had probably been waiting a while for the chance. In front of her was a circle the size of a courtyard, with something the size of a bucket asleep in the middle of it, and she had been about to walk straight past. He told her what it was. was, a metal slime, which could produce nearly every element there was, and the circle was that size because of what it had done to the last room it stood in. She took it. He watched her do it, then told her to come upstairs when she had finished because he wanted to talk. She told him he could have opened with that. He allowed it. Nora sat down badly on the front edge of the chair, both feet under her. He told her to calm down, poured tea into 2 cups, drank his own all the way down, and set it back on the table where she could see it. Then he waited. She understood what he was doing and drank hers. It was very good. She said so before she could stop herself, and it diffused more than she meant it to. Then he told her what he was. I was never sealed, he said. I put that story out myself. Nothing in this castle has ever been locked from the outside. I was tired, and I wanted people to stop coming. He had no parents and had never found out what became of them. He was raised by monsters, an ogre first and then others, and they fed him and taught him to fight, and not one of them ever asked him what he was. My friends were monsters and demons, not by choice. They were the ones who would have me. I went to humans twice. The first time they refused me. The second time they were frightened of me, and frightened is worse because refused ends and frightened does not. People began calling him a demon lord, and after a while, everyone did. I did not pick that name. It is a description of who stood behind me. Humans started killing his people. He fought back to make it stop. It did not stop, he said. It went on longer than most kingdoms last. Then one year, the pressure came off. Fewer parties on the roads, fewer burned villages, fewer of his own failing to come home. He decided they had outlasted it. So I gave the order to withdraw. All of them. Everybody back. No more fighting. We are finished. It is the only order I ever gave that I was pleased with. A hero met them on the way home. He killed all of them. That came out in the same voice he had used about the tea. Not one came back. She did not say anything. There was nothing available to say. He found the hero afterwards. It took him a long time, and then it did not take long, and the man did not survive it. The church had called him Light. Solomon gave the name once and did not come back to it. Afterwards, he went home, put out the story that a hero had sealed him inside his own castle so nobody would come looking, and went to sleep. I meant to sleep for a while, he said. It was about 100 years. He woke up in a clean building with nobody in it. There is a garden behind the east wall. There are graves in it. I did not dig them. He turned the cup around on the table. Some of them got home, enough to dig, and then not enough to keep going. I was asleep in this room while they were doing it, and I do not know how long they were out there. He stopped. You are the first person to come through that gate since, and when you did, I asked you whether you had seen anyone in the castle. He drank the rest of his tea, which had gone cold, and did not apologize for any of it. The light in the window had gone gray while he was talking. Nora heard herself say it before she had decided anything. So come and live at our place. She had not been building up to it. It arrived and left her mouth in the same movement, and then she had to sit there with it out in the open in front of a great demon lord going red. Stopping was worse, so she kept going. There was ground behind her house, 90 people, a workshop row, more food than anyone could eat. He could bring whatever he wanted, and nobody there would care what he had been called. He did not answer for a long time. Then he asked it carefully, like a man who thinks he might get the wording wrong. Is that allowed? Not whether it was wise, not whether it was safe for the 90 people, whether it was allowed. She said yes, and that he could start that night if he wanted. He said he would need a day or two. She flew home in the dark and did not mention it to anybody. 3 days later, the castle came over the barrens. It pulled itself up out of the ground first, all of it, towers and curtain wall, and split courtyard together, and then it walked. It crossed the ashlands at the speed of a loaded cart, put one corner down on the open ground behind her house, and settled. Every window in the settlement rattled. 2 fence posts went over. Nora had a speech ready. She had worked on it for 3 days. The dwarves came out, looked at the castle, and asked whether he was staying. She said he was. They asked whether he wanted the road on that side widened. Walter's only question was about the foundations, and he asked it of the castle rather than of her. Nobody called a meeting. Nobody asked what he had been called. 90 people took a great demon lord as a neighbor in about 4 minutes, and she was more surprised by that than she had been by a walking castle. He greeted her creatures before the people, and they took to him at once. That evening, everyone ate outside together. Solomon drank about a cup of what the dwarves had brought, started a story he did not finish, and fell asleep at the table. The orc carried him home. The dwarf smith wanted a fire lich because his furnace would not hold the heat the deep-sea steel alloy needed, so she went down and got him one. It was the first time anybody had ordered from her by specification. That afternoon, the griffin reported a single person on foot, coming up out of the Deepwood from the direction of human country. Victoria walked in an hour later. Tall beast folk, a borrowed steel greatsword across her back. Nobody with her, and she had crossed that forest the way other people cross a street. Walter knew her on sight, having sold her blades for years, and told Nora what she was: special rank, the tier under the hero and above everything else. She had come for a sword. The smith said a week. She said she would wait, then asked what needed doing in the meantime, and offered to hunt or carry before anyone thought to ask her. While they were talking, a skeleton crew brought a pot to the fire, filled it, and started cooking. Victoria watched them do it, asked whether they knew to salt it, was told they did, and went back to the conversation. Nora made a private note that everyone who found this place was unhinged, and that she probably had to include herself. 2 days later, Nora took her downstairs on the strength of a boast. The boast turned out to have been modest. The 4th floor was a graveyard, and the skeletons on it walked past them without looking up. Victoria watched that happen twice, remarked that the dead down here were unusually well behaved, and let it go. Whatever did not walk past came at them from 3 sides. She swung once at the largest of them and missed. The blade went a good arm's length short, and the thing came apart anyway. Then she went through the rest of the floor in single strikes, holy force running up a sword that was not even hers. Nora spent the walk to the next stair, revising every number she had in her head. The 5th floor was one room, enormous and empty, and at the far end, a raised altar with something seated on it that filled the space around it. Nora asked Victoria not to kill it. Victoria said she probably could not, which was not what Nora expected from somebody who had just walked through a floor without stopping. So Nora spent the day on it instead. It took 1 sentence. The taming felt warm and pleasant, and she had no idea why. None of the others ever had. Then the appraisal came back and she read it twice. It had tried to rot the world once. A god had put it on that altar, and a cult had guarded what it knew ever since. She panicked for about 90 seconds, then named it Blight, because she had to call it something, and added it to the roster. The floor, being empty now, produced a chest. Inside was a greatsword she could not tilt off the boards, that nothing they had would mark, and that would end things which do not die. It was worth nothing to her. Victoria asked for it, asked again at length, and finished by swearing lifelong service in front of 2 dwarves and a skeleton. Nora handed it over, and had bought a special rank for the price of a sword she could not lift. Blight came home that evening and made friends with the rock dragon, which was smaller in every dimension, and delighted to have found a superior. There was a party, and it went late. She went to bed with a castle behind her house, a special rank on the payroll, and a thing that had once tried to end the world asleep on the stone outside. Whatever taming it had done to her, she did not find out until the morning. Nora woke the morning after the party with a headache and a status she did not recognize. There was a new job on it, and under the job, a second unique skill with a description 4 lines long. She read it 3 times and got nothing out of it except the word copy. She went outside in yesterday's clothes to find something to try it on. The Trent stood where it always stood at the edge of the fruit ground, doing nothing. It was the least impressive thing she owned and the most profitable. She used the skill. There were 2 Trents. The second came up out of the ground a pace to the left of the first, identical down to the split in the bark, and the fruit on it was the same fruit Marcus paid more for than everything else on his wagon put together. Nora stood in the wet grass and did the arithmetic. Every morning since the tree line she had chosen, one thing, once a day, and a wrong choice cost her the whole day, and she had made plenty of wrong choices. The rule was still there. It had stopped mattering. Anything she already had, she could have twice by tomorrow and 4 times the day after, and the only thing left between her and any number at all was how long she was willing to wait. She picked a fruit off the new tree, ate it, and went to find breakfast. It was a week before she mentioned it to anybody, and when she did, she made it sound smaller than it was. 2 days later, she took Victoria down to the 6th floor and found a town on it. Streets, houses, shutters closed, nothing living behind any of the windows, and the feeling that she had walked into somebody's home. The courtyard past the gate held well over 100 low monsters. Victoria went in at one end and came out the other, and it was clear, and she had swung twice. Up in the keep, there was one occupant, a goblin, taller than the rest, armored, and it did not come at them. It watched them cross the hall and waited to be spoken to. Nora hired it as a leader rather than as a fighter, because that was plainly what it was. The second griffin came in over the fields 4 days later to say the caravan was on the south track. She had made that griffin days earlier, because 1 pair of eyes in the air was not enough. Marcus arrived overloaded and complaining about it. Dwarf business first, as always. Or tools, salt, seed of every species she had asked for. Then he walked her round the back of the third wagon and showed her the people, 30 of them, standing in their own dust. 20 were laborers who had been moved off land somewhere south and had run out of places to walk to. 10 were engineers exiled for saying the wrong thing in the wrong room and unemployable everywhere since. All 30 had come freely, for a wage and a roof, because there was no other offer anywhere, and they knew it. They cost you a wage and a bed, he told her, already moving toward the next wagon. That is the whole arrangement. Nobody here is owed a speech. Nora asked none of them why they had left. Walter had never asked her. By nightfall, every one of them had a job. The laborers went to the kitchens, the pens, and the fields, because the town fed 90 people twice a day on one crew that could cook. The engineers went to water and drainage, and a second crossing over the river that came down out of the Deepwood past the fields, under Walter, who was informed he now ran a department and took about 4 seconds to decide he liked it. Then, Marcus offered to build a road between Alberia and Emberhold, and to bear the whole cost of it. She turned the money down and offered him labor instead, 30 of the skeleton crew and 3 of the heavy creatures for as long as the work took. He accepted without arguing, which meant he had wanted the road more than the leverage. The hunting party's evening report was 1 line long. There was a cow on the food floor, on its own, and it was glowing. Victoria half remembered a children's story about a golden cow and could not remember how it ended. They went down before dark. The thing stood in the grass entirely unbothered, while Nora walked up and spent the day on it, and the appraisal came back legendary. The milk was a cure-all, and it made whatever drank it harder to kill. Both of them tried it on the spot, on their knees in the grass, which was undignified and worth it. Nora copied it on the walk back to the stair, because there was no reason on earth to have one. The dwarves had both animals surrounded inside a minute of them coming up the stair. Cheese, Nora said. Butter, cream. Walter took that as an instruction and had 2 of his people arguing about churns before she finished the sentence. Marcus came to look, walked once around the nearer of the 2, and had a policy inside 90 seconds. Butter leaves this town, he said. Cheese leaves this town. Milk never does. 1 bucket of the raw supply in the wrong hands, and somebody else owned it inside a year. She gave him a barrel to test on the road and promised him the surplus, and he went away happier than he had been about the steal. They ate outside that night, at tables that had not existed a month before. The kitchen crew put out a stew made with the milk, the chickens Marcus had brought, pork, vegetables, and proper flour. It came out the color of a lamp. People went quiet over it, which in that town was the highest praise available. Halfway through the meal, a dwarf climbed onto the bench with his cup and had to be steadied twice to stand on it. "To the ones who came here with nothing," he shouted, and the tables went quiet in pieces. "To the lunatics, to the monsters, to every one of you who ought by rights to be dead somewhere else and is sitting here eating instead." He got the cup up over his head, and about half of what was in it went down his sleeve. "To Emberhold," 90 voices said it back to him. Nora did not move. She sat with both hands flat on the table while the noise came back up around her, then leaned over and asked Walter, quietly, how long the town had been called that. He had to think about it. Since around the time the first forges lit, he told her. The fires were the first thing anyone could see from out on the barrens at night. The name came off that and stuck, and nobody had mentioned it because everybody assumed she knew. She sat there a while longer. Then she picked her cup up and stood, and did not make a speech, and said the name back at them. The tables took it off her and made it a great deal louder than she had. 6 days later, she felt the kraken calling and went through the door at a run. It was standing off the shallows, holding a ship above the water. The hull was broken along most of one side, and broken before the kraken got to it, and it set the whole thing down on the sand, like a man putting down a tray. There were people still on it. The first one down was an elf, silver-haired, filthy, and so composed about having been carried across an ocean by a monster that Nora nearly laughed. He asked, in very formal language, for an explanation. His name was Blaine. He was a king, and there was no longer any country for him to be king of. The demon lord had taken his continent, not the border of it, not a province, the whole of it. They had gone out by sea in whatever would float, and other ships had left with beast folk aboard, and dwarves and humans, and nobody had seen any of them since. He had 10 people left. Nora watched the 10 of them come down off the wreck and made the same offer she had made to everybody who ever walked out of that forest. There is work here, she said. Take it and you stay. That is the whole of it. He asked her to repeat the condition. She repeated it, and something went out of his shoulders. 20 dwarves and a stack of stretchers had the 11 of them off that beach and through the door before the tide turned, and she ran the whole of it herself. They were put up in the castle until houses could be built, and Solomon was so pleased about it, he came out to meet every stretcher himself. Lunch was 2 crafts finding each other. Elves work wood, dwarves work stone and metal, and by the end of the meal, there was an argument about joinery with 4 people in it, and no ill will anywhere. Blaine got up before the plates were cleared. He pledged what was left of his line, himself, his 10, and any of his people ever found alive, to Nora and to the town, for as long as any of them drew breath. He did it formally, in front of everybody, and he had clearly written it on the wreck. She had asked for work. He had given her a bloodline. Nora thanked him, sat down, and could not eat anything else. That night, she moved the elf housing to the top of the build list. Blaine asked to see the forest. Inside an hour, he had shown her she had been walking through it blind for a month. He stopped at a tree and told her it was a Trent. It looked like a tree. 40 paces on, he stopped at another, then a third. And by the time they turned back, he had pointed out 6 of them, on a path she had used every second day since the spring. Then he lifted his chin at a branch above her. There was a spider up there watching them, and had been since the fields, and it was keeping its distance because it was wary of her. He named 2 more things she could not see at all. Goblins that hold themselves invisible, clever enough to work in groups, living in her forest in numbers. Elves see mana. That was the whole explanation, and it was why an afternoon of his was worth 3 days of hers. She had him hold one of the invisible ones, still long enough to hire it, and had an ambush and patrol unit planned around it before they were out of the trees. On the walk home, he told her the other 2 things. The mana in that forest was far past safe, not high, past safe. Elves live their whole lives in mana, and even an elf would sicken on this much of it, and he said it the way a doctor says a number. It was also coming from somewhere, from the mountain, deeper in, and the mountain was a great deal worse than the forest. Nora asked how long a trip out there would take, and started working out who she would leave behind. The morning everything happened started with alcohol. A dwarf caught her on patrol to report that they had worked out how to make it from Trant fruit, that the first batch was drinkable and the second better, and she approved the whole enterprise while still walking. The smith wanted to talk about cold. She described refrigeration to him extremely badly, using her hands, and he wrote it all down and went off to start research on a description she knew was wrong. Walter wanted magma ore out of the fire dungeon for a magic tool he would not explain, and offered in exchange to build her a plate that kept a cup hot, because he had noticed she never got to the bottom of one warm. She said she would go after breakfast and take the metal slime and the horse. The horse she had taken the week before in the fire dungeon, as a black blur that crossed her vision faster than she could turn her head. She hired it before she had properly seen it. It ran faster than sound, and it ran hot, and the metal slime had solved the second problem by becoming a saddle. Victoria heard the word horse and invited herself along. The shelf above the flow was hot enough that Victoria burned out an expensive heat tool getting to it, and was still cooking inside her own leathers. Nora stood next to her and was fine. Neither of them said anything about it. Worms came up at them out of the rock twice and were dealt with without comment. The metal slime went over the edge, took what Walter wanted out of the lava, wrapped it in itself, and carried it back. With the job done, Victoria pointed out that they were standing in a dungeon, so Nora spent the day on a wyvern off the upper shelf, scaled hard enough to turn steel, built for the heat, and, according to Victoria, very good eating, which was not a consideration Nora had expected. Nora rode the horse home and left Victoria the wyvern. She came up the last rise at a speed that turned an afternoon into 6 minutes, and knew before she was off the horse that something was wrong. The fields were empty. The workshop row had nobody in it. Every person in that town was standing somewhere they had no business standing, in groups, facing the same direction. Solomon came out to meet her and did not waste any of it. The Demon Lord's army is marching on Emberhold. Solomon explained the method in under a minute because he had spent a lifetime on the receiving end of it. The current Demon Lord did not raise armies. He put a fragment of himself into a monster. The monster went where it was told, and that was how a thing with no interest in strategy fielded tens of thousands. Victoria had scouted the leading edge. Her estimate was around 10,000, overwhelmingly weak, and moving like nothing in it was in charge. Nora made the decision standing up, in about 4 seconds, and it was not a brave one. 10,000 bodies arriving at a wall with 90 civilians behind it was a demolition regardless of who won. The barons were flat, empty, and 3 hours wide. So the fight would happen out there. Solomon offered to come. She refused him and refused Victoria in the same breath and told them why. If anything got past her, the town needed the 2 people in it who could stop something. The noble goblin would hold the gate and run whoever else could carry a spear. Then Solomon asked her for one thing. If she found an officer out there, take it alive rather than kill it, because he wanted to ask it questions. Nora said she would try. She went up on the wyvern first and looked at it from height. It was a stain 3 miles across, moving slowly, and the front of it was close enough to make out shapes. Goblins in the tens of thousands, skeletons in loose blocks, orcs, undead in a gray mass behind them, a few heavy things standing ahead above everything else, and a handful of bone dragons turning above the line. Nothing in it frightened her, and she checked twice before she let herself believe that. She came down 2 miles out and got onto the rock dragon, which was the first thing she had ever hired on her first day, with 9 minutes of life left in her. It knew what the dust cloud was. It walked toward it anyway. Then it ran. The rock dragon went into the front of that army, the way a cart goes through a hedge. The line did not break so much as fold, sideways, in both directions from the point of impact. Dust went up in a wall, and the noise arrived a full second behind the ground shaking. It swept. It turned and swept back. Where it put its shoulder down 100 yards of front rank stopped existing, and the ranks behind walked into the gap without slowing, without spreading, without one order given anywhere. That was when Nora understood what she was fighting. It was not maneuvering, it was filling holes. 10,000 things that could not do anything else. Then the rock dragon opened its mouth and made a sound, and everything in a wide cone in front of it went down at once. She had not known it could do that. Inside an hour, the army that had crossed the barrens to take Emberhold was a few hundred shapes scattered over open ground, and none of them were moving toward the town. One thing still stood where the sound had gone through. A caster, black-boned, upright in all that dust, and it had held. She went for it and reached for a tame she had already spent that morning on a wyvern in a lava field, and there was nothing there to spend. It turned and ran, and it was very fast, and it got away clean. She finished the rest and went home. Nothing had come within a mile of the wall. Nobody on it had been touched. Nora came back gray to the eyebrows with dust and got counted at the gate with everybody else. Solomon was waiting by the tables and did not sit down, which she noticed before he said anything. There was not one demon in that army, he said. He had walked the field himself while she was finishing it. No officers, no commanders, nothing of any rank, in 10,000. And by his account, there had never once been an army of that man's without demons standing over it. Victoria came in behind him and made it worse. She had checked 3 of them out of curiosity, and the fragments were in everyone. So it had been his army, sent by him, carrying pieces of him, aimed at this town. Nobody offered an explanation. Nobody had one. Nora said it would keep until morning and told the kitchen to feed every person who had stood on that wall all afternoon. The meal went ahead, and the tables filled, and the noise came back. 10,000 had crossed the barrens to take Emberhold apart, and every one of them had carried a piece of the man who sent them. Not one of them had been a demon. Nobody could explain it, and nobody did. It rained on Emberhold in the middle of the afternoon, and every person on the site stopped working and stood in it. 29 days without a drop. Nothing had died, because the fields sat on the river, and the slime made water on request. But the dust had got into the bread, and everybody had politely stopped mentioning it. Nora came out of the workshop row with her hands still wet and looked up. And the low cloud over the town was not cloud. It had a tail. It was longer than the settlement was wide, and it was swimming, and the rain was coming off its back. Solomon reached her at speed, which he never did. "Do not take it," he said. She kept looking up. He told her what it was. The thing wandered, and had wandered longer than anyone could account for, and it followed no river, road, or border. Villages with no water, no mage, no money, and nobody to write to got 1 rain a year off that animal's back. They planted on it. That was the whole margin between a bad year and a year people did not come back from. "You have the river," he went on, counting on his fingers, which she had also never seen him do. "You have a slime that makes water out of nothing. You have an orchard that does not care what the weather is. You have a kitchen with a surplus. You have 4 ways to drink. They have 1, and it is going over your head right now." Nora said she had heard him. Then she tamed it. Solomon was angry, properly angry, in a way she had not seen before, and none of it was loud. He asked flatly whether she meant to park it over her own fields and keep it there, and whether she understood that a yes made her exactly the sort of person he had spent his long life watching take useful things because they were in reach. She shook her head once. No. Then she told the whale where to go instead. The war had emptied a stretch of country north and west of Alberia. Farms and villages nobody had come back to, and nobody was watering. She sent it there, not over Emberhold, over that. Rain over the town thinned and stopped inside the hour. The roofs steamed, and the dust was back by the following afternoon. Before it went, she spent the day's copy on it. There were 2 whales after that. One went north and west over the emptied farms. The other she pointed at the villages Solomon had been describing, the ones with a single river between 4 of them, and it went, and the total amount of rain falling on the world that season went up rather than sideways. She did not say that part out loud. She was not good at arguing and had stopped trying to be. Solomon stood beside her until both of them were out of sight past the tree line. Somewhere in there, he stopped being angry. He did not apologize, and she did not ask him to, and they went into dinner. The rock dragon came in 4 hours after it was due, which had never happened. It came up the slope carefully, in a way it did not normally bother with, and put its head down on the stone. There was a woman lying along the ridge of its neck. She was unconscious, filthy to the knees, and had been out in the barrens long enough that the sun had done real work on her. The dragon had found her walking, and then found her not walking, and had brought her home, which nobody had ever asked it to do. Solomon looked at her once, and said she was a demon, and then said nothing else that helped. Nora carried her inside, put her on a bed, made tea, and sat down to wait for her to wake up. Solomon watched from the doorway with the expression of a man composing an objection. She woke a little after midnight and was crying before she was properly upright. "Please do not kill me. I can be useful. Please." Nora put the cup down and told her nobody was going to do anything to her tonight. The story came out in pieces. She had served a household. The household was gone, all of it, and the Lord with it, and she had lived only because she had been sent somewhere else that week and came back to nothing worth describing. She had walked after that and did not know for how long. Her name was Maria, she said, and then she apologized for saying it, as though a name were a liberty. Solomon called her a complication from the doorway. Nobody knew whose household it had been, or whether anyone was still looking for her, or what she was under the dust. And taking her in was a decision with a shape none of them could see yet. Then he said it was Nora's decision, and stopped. "You can stay," Nora said. "I am going to watch you for a while, because I do not know you. If you turn out to be something I have to deal with, I will deal with it. I am telling you that now, so it is not a surprise later." Maria stopped crying and said she understood. She was still braced for the rest of it, and the rest of it did not come. "What work can you do?" She sat up straight to answer that one, and the list went on longer than anyone in the room expected. Household accounts, stores, and inventory. Cooking for 40, laundry, mending, letters, and the running of a large kitchen, and everyone in it. When Nora asked what else, she mentioned that she was also quite strong, and Solomon made a short noise that was almost impressed. There was a bed and a job for her before breakfast. Nobody in the town was told about the watching, because it was not their business, and Nora never raised it again. 2 days later, she put everything she owned on the flat rock south of the wall and counted it. Over 100 creatures. The town had passed 100 residents in the same week, and neither number fitted in her head anymore, which was the actual problem. So she stopped organizing by strength and started organizing by purpose. Forest work to the Trents and the Elves, the sea to the Kraken, the second floor of the labyrinth for food, with a hunting team and a haulage team under it, and the third floor for metal, day patrol and night patrol on shifts, with a fourth maker copied specifically so that something was awake at 4 in the morning, the wasteland survey, the workshops, and the 3 heaviest things she owned held back for one job only, which was the day something came at the wall again. Then the gaps. She could not staff the fire dungeon, and she could not hold air cover over the whole territory in daylight, and she said both out loud so everyone could hear what was missing. That week, she also went back down to the 6th floor, found a throne room behind the keep hall she had already cleared, tamed its occupant in one word, and came home with a band out of the chest behind it that raised heavy labor from ordinary supply. The dwarves had it on the haulage rota by nightfall. Maria went to close protection on Solomon's recommendation. He had spent a morning finding out how tough she was, and had come away with his eyebrows up. Nora read the roster out, told them all to do their best, drank her tea, and admitted to herself that she liked this part considerably more than any of the fighting. The Kraken called at noon the next day. Nora took Maria and the horse. Maria made a noise across the whole crossing that Nora had not previously heard an adult produce, and arrived asking whether she could have one. The Kraken had not found a ship. It had found a man walking along the seafloor, going somewhere. He came up the shingle streaming water, entirely unhurried, and put out a hand that was not made of skin. Wallace. There was a family name attached to that once. It has been 300 years and I have not needed it, so it has gone. Then he told them the rest briskly. He had been summoned out of the same world she had come from 300 years earlier by a country 2 seasons away from being finished, alone. One man called across for one job, and the job was a demon king with an army standing behind it. Dealing with it took him one sentence to describe: the king and the army both, and afterwards, there had not been an army left to speak of. Then they threw him out. They exiled him for winning. He wrung salt water out of a coat that no longer needed to keep him warm. They were not cruel about it. They were frightened, and frightened people are tidy. There was a document. It was read to me very politely. 3 centuries of unmapped country after that. He had rebuilt his own body piece by piece into a machine, because nothing made the way he had been made last 300 years, and it cost him most of what he used to be. What he could do once was weapons. Anything, out of any material on request. Now it was a holy blade if somebody handed him materials and mana, and an ordinary one if they did not. So the useful half, he said, is gone. What is left only matters if there is a forge somewhere and somebody with a reason to want 100 of the same. Come and live at Emberhold, Nora said. He stopped and asked whether she made a habit of inviting strangers into her town 9 minutes after meeting them. My job tells me whether the thing in front of me is an enemy. She was already walking back toward the horse. And once something is an ally, it cannot go back to being one. So it is not really trust. He said that was very interesting and said it twice more on the way home. Wallace started in the workshops before dark and was still standing in the same spot the next morning. The town had been sitting on a field's worth of salvage since the battle, and on a season of deep sea steel on top of it. In one night, he turned all of it into equipment. Every summoned guard got a blade. Every patrol got armor cut for the shape of the thing wearing it, which had never once been true before. Walter did not go to bed either. He stood in the doorway most of the night, and by morning had stopped speaking in complete sentences. By the following evening, the entire metal supply was gone. A stock that had taken 2 months to build was gear on a rack inside a day and a half. I need a mine, Nora said, standing in an empty store. The 7th floor of the labyrinth turned out to be a mine. She noticed that, said nothing about it, and took the ogre, the metal slime, Victoria, and Maria down into it. Maria picked their direction at the fork, because Maria could feel where the metal ran thickest, which nobody had known she could do. Nora came back up with a golem, made of the hardest metal anyone there had a name for, and the floor went on a rota by the end of the week. Her house was finished on the 33rd day. 2 stories, a garden that was mostly bare soil with intentions in it, and a stable at the back for the horse. For 33 days, she had slept against a dragon's flank, under a lean-to, and in rooms other people had built for other reasons. She went up the stairs of that one, and they were hers. Maria moved in the same evening. Nobody discussed it, and nobody was asked. Solomon was faintly put out about losing her from the castle and mentioned it twice. Nora told him the walk was 4 minutes. Far to the north, the ones who had lit up when the pages were read out in the Helios summoning hall were eating dinner over a map. 30 days of war had done what it does to the people who survive it. Ethan had cleared a town that week without help. Sarah could hold a line of wounded now and stay standing afterwards. Hannah had stopped keeping count of anything. They were also worth a great deal in a throne room by then. 2 foreign courts had made formal approaches that month, one with land attached, and the party declined both, and the declining was noticed further than accepting would have been. The route was set by difficulty. The holy armor first, because it sat in a 10-floor labyrinth in a spirit country, and the things inside were armor rather than dead men. The staff second, because the staff was on a peak, and the peak was worse. The book was not anywhere anyone could name. Armor, then the staff, Ethan said, marking the map. The book waits until somebody tells us where it is. Then he remembered an errand. He had been asked months earlier, in a corridor, to secure the cooperation of a southern margrave, and to find out why that margrave's territory was doing so well in a war that was going badly for everybody else. Somebody at the table listed what was south: a forest, a wasteland, a desert, a peak. All 4 were named as hazards. Nobody at that table said anyone lived there. Ethan put the errand at the bottom of a list of things to do after the war and asked what everyone wanted to eat. Marcus came up the south track 10 days later, looked at the new houses, and asked when exactly she had found the time. Trade went the way trade went. Seed, spices, a great deal of salt, which she noted, because she had started wondering whether she could make her own out of the sea. The birds were laying. The milk numbers were up. She paid him in monster materials and produce instead of coin, which delighted him, because both were worth more than money 200 miles from anywhere. Then he stopped. He put the tally sheet down on the wagon board and did not pick it up again. The fast, loud, slightly overacted merchant went somewhere else. and did not come back for 11 minutes. His eyes stayed on her. "I am not asking you as a merchant. I want that understood before I say the rest." Then he said the rest. The war had displaced more people than his kingdom could put anywhere. There were camps on the border, and the border was a war zone, and there were mothers with children in them, and children in them with nobody at all. He had done the arithmetic on what a winter does to a border camp, and had not liked the number. "I am asking Emberhold to take 500 of them." Nora did the arithmetic out loud in the yard, because that was how she thought. Food was not a question. The fields produced past what 100 people could eat. The orchard did not care what season it was, and the second floor had a hunting rota on it. Water was not a question either. Work was not a question. There was more work in Emberhold than there were hands, and there had been since the day the place got a name. Beds were a question. Beds were the whole question. 50 arrivals meant 50 places to sleep ready before they came, not after, and the dwarves were already building against a list as long as her arm. Then she asked who teaches the children, and answered it herself before he could. The elves, who could put up a schoolroom in a week, and Solomon, who had been complaining for a month about having nothing to do with his evenings. "Yes," she said. The 500 were Helios' kingdom's own, walked out of it with what they could carry, and left in border camps that Alberia was paying for. Nora set the pacing herself, not 500 at once, which would put people in tents and break the kitchens inside a week. 50 a month, 10 months. Every group housed and working before the next one came up the track. Marcus opened his mouth to negotiate, heard what she had actually said, and closed it. He attached a road contract with a confidentiality clause a full paragraph long. Nobody outside was to be told where that road went or what was at the end of it. She read it, agreed, and signed, because she had wanted exactly that anyway. Lunch was on the tables by the time they finished, and the elves had made something new out of the golden milk and the orchard fruit, and a great deal of ice. Marcus ate one bowl of it, went quiet, and was a merchant again inside a minute. He named a price for an exclusive before the bowl was empty, and Blaine, who had made the stuff, named a better one and got it. The first 50 came up the south track 11 days later. 14 of them were children, and 4 of those had arrived with nobody. The kitchen fed them at the second sitting. The noble goblin had beds for all of them before dark, because he had been told beds by dark. In the morning, 2 of the elves started clearing out a long room for a school, and Maria took every name down into a ledger in handwriting, better than anyone else in the town could manage. That night, Nora walked the row of new houses and counted beds. There were enough for the next 50. She sent word to Walter to start on the 50 after that. The 8th floor did not attack them, and that turned out to be worse. Trees as wide as houses went up past where the light gave out. Under them were grazing animals the size of carts and birds, heavy enough to carry one off, and not one of them so much as turned its head. The party crossed the whole floor, found the gate down to the 9th, and never had a single fight. Victoria complained about that for an hour. Maria kept looking behind her. They doubled back east because Maria could feel where the mana ran thicker. The trees thinned, and in the clear ground past them stood a building, low and wide, its doors open and matting on the floor inside. Everything stopped. The metal slime would not come past the last tree. Victoria got within 30 paces and said, without any embarrassment at all, that she was not going in there. Nora went in alone. A figure stood in the middle of the matting in training dress, and it had been standing there a very long time. It did not speak. It crossed the floor faster than she could follow and hit her once, and everything it had went into that one strike. She was still standing when it finished. The figure held its position a moment. Then it was gone, and there was a chest on the matting with an orb inside. Inside the orb was a technique that ran force out through her own vitality. She tried it outdoors on an empty slope, at nothing, and took the top off a hillside 200 paces away. Victoria walked over to look and came back with no comment at all. Then Nora worked out why it had been left in a room nobody would enter. The output scaled off stamina. A swordsman has one person's stamina and always will, which makes the technique a curiosity. Hers came off 100 creatures and went up every time she hired another one. It was also the first thing she had ever owned that could hurt something by itself. She was not braver than the people who had refused to come in. She was harder to kill, and she knew the difference. The 9th floor was the opposite, desert. Thousands of flying things, all of them coming the moment the party stepped onto the sand. Victoria cut, Maria scattered. The red ogre closed, the metal slime fired. Nora threw force at whatever got past them, and by the end, the floor was quiet. What annoyed her was not the fight, but that there was no way to carry any of it home, so she spent the walk back designing a recovery team. On the way out, she took the floor's boss without a fight because it was large enough to be transport. At home, she practiced on the muster rock. She could coat herself in the stuff or throw it. and both spent stamina, which was the one thing she had too much of. Solomon came out to watch, mentioned that he used the same technique, and offered to teach her the rest of it. The rest of it was not force. It carries what you are, he told her, walking a slow circle around the rock. Intent, temper, rank. A room decides about a person before that person opens their mouth, and this is what decides it. You can shape it into pressure. You can shape it into the opposite. He stopped walking. He did not raise his voice, and he did not move. Nora could not breathe. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then the air was ordinary again, and he was a polite man in a black coat standing on a rock. He told her she could learn to run her own thinking faster with it, and to walk into a room full of people who outranked her and be the thing in it that mattered. You are going to need it. He did not say what for. She noticed that he did not, and she did not ask. The 10th floor was a courtyard in front of a shrine that had come down a long time ago. She knew the line of that roof. She had seen the same curve on buildings a very long way from here, and she looked at it a while and said nothing to anybody. At the far end of the courtyard, something enormous and black lay across the flagstones with its wings folded. Solomon put a hand out to stop her. He named what it was in 3 words and started on what should be done about it, which was to end it here, on this floor, before it ever worked out there was a way up. She tamed it while he was still in the middle of that sentence. It came awake, and she felt it be surprised, which had never happened to her before. Then the history came up, and neither of them said anything for a while. It had been a guardian. It had governed rain and harvest over a whole continent, and the continent was not there anymore. Something had got into it and rotted it from the inside, and a god had brought it down here and shut a door on it. Solomon looked at it for a long moment and said the rot could not be pulled out by force. He had tried that on smaller things. It does not work. Then he remembered that holy force burns it. I know somebody, Nora said. A holy blade is a month of work for the best smith a kingdom can find. Wallace asked for adamantine and 1 slime. He had it finished by the following evening, drained most of the slime doing it, and thanked the slime. Walter timed him, then sat down on a crate. She kept the sword. She never learned to fence with it and never tried. She went in front with the shield the way she always had, and the blade was for one job. They brought it up after dark, and it lay down on the open ground in the middle of the town and let her work. The blade went in where the rot was. What came off it was not blood. It came away in long ribbons of black that thinned as they rose and were gone before they reached the roofs. It took most of an hour. The dragon did not move once. When it was finished, the scales underneath were black and clean, and the lamplight ran on them like water. It stood up. It put its wings out to their full width, which took in most of the open ground, and every creature in Emberhold came out of the dark to stand at the edges and watch. Then it went up. 2 beats flattened the grass for 30 paces and took a washing line with them. And after that, there was nothing to hear because it was already too high. Up and up until it was a shape against the stars. And then it was not a shape anymore. The rain started a few minutes after that, and it was not ordinary rain. It came down slowly, and it was warm, and there was light in it. The whole valley stood in a soft falling brightness that settled on the roofs and the rows and the bare heads of 100 people who had come outside without being called. It fell on the fields most of the night. Maria put her hands out in it. Solomon did not go indoors. Nobody said anything for a long while, and the dragon stayed up there in the dark, going in slow wide circles over the fields. Blaine was at her door before breakfast, asking her to come and look, and he was not a man who hurried anywhere. Everything had come in at once, every row, every crop, ripe on the same morning, and half again the size it had any business being. He got a cabbage off the ground with both arms and could not hold it comfortably. The farmers wanted to know why. Blaine gave them the soil, the Trents, the slime runoff, and then the rain, in that order, and they listened politely, did not believe a word of it, and went back to picking. Nora declared a vegetable day to work through the surplus. It was the least popular order she had ever given. By evening, there were 9 dishes on the table, and an argument about which of them was the least offensive. The floors kept coming, and she kept taking them. The 11th was a city. Streets ran straight and crossed at right angles. The buildings had square window frames in rows, going up 4 and 5 stories, all of it fallen in on itself and buried to the 2nd floor in dust. Nora stood in the middle of one of those streets longer than the others did not explain why, and then told them to spread out. Things came up out of the gaps between the buildings, and Victoria dealt with them and found it dull. Past the buildings was a housing district with a hive grown through the middle of it. That engagement was short. What came out at the end was a queen, armored, too heavy to fly, and Nora hired her on the spot for honey and put her with the kitchen crew. She asked Solomon about the city that evening. He said that when he was young, The old people used to claim the world had been reset once, and that a buried city might have something to do with that. He had never believed them, and had never quite been able to put it down. Neither of them did anything about it. An oil press went in that week, which sounds like nothing, and changed what the kitchen could do overnight. Wall construction started on the north side. A war elephant with a hide-like cut stone came off the fire dungeon's 3rd floor and went on to the construction crew, where it shifted in a day what the haulage teams shifted in 4. Solomon spent an afternoon teaching her to turn force back on whatever had thrown it. Victoria volunteered to do the throwing, was sent across the field repeatedly, and kept getting up to ask for another go. The finished version had taken him 100 years. Nora managed the crude one, and was told kindly that this was fine. She stopped in the kitchen doorway on her way to dinner, and did the sums, and did not enjoy the answer. Bread first. The loaf on the board was top-grade wheat, butter off the golden milk, eggs from birds that had no business laying that size. There was not a king on the continent who could have put it on his own table. Nobody at the tables remarked on it. They were arguing about the vegetables, then the rest of it. Deep sea steel on the patrols as standard issue, on skeletons, because there was enough to go round. Rare metal out of the mine going into hand tools, and a holy blade a day, or a dark one, depending on what Wallace felt like making that morning. She wrote the secrecy policy that night, because any one of those 4 things was worth a war to somebody, and she had all 4. Nothing left the valley without her name on it. No visitor went past the wagon yard. Nobody outside was told what the South Road was for. Marcus had been telling her politely for 2 visits that she was a strategic problem. That was the evening she believed him. The explosion came about an hour after tea. She went over the wall expecting the wall to be the problem. What she found in the dust was Wallace, one of Walter's dwarves, a tube the length of an arm on Wallace's shoulder, and a rock formation 400 paces off that was no longer a formation. Charge in the base, propellant behind it. He was delighted. The circuit is the interesting part. Would you like a turn? She would. She put it up on her shoulder. He pointed her at a boulder, and she fired it once. The boulder stopped being that shape. The dwarf began listing what else was on the bench. Not tonight. Wallace said there were 11 other things, and that he was pleased with most of them. She said she would look at them in the morning, in daylight, after she had eaten. Emberhold got its first law that night. No experiments after sunset. She walked back, thinking that the skeletons could carry those, all of them, and that nobody in the world knew this town was here. Then she stopped thinking about it, because there was nowhere to put it, and went to bed. 40 days into the war, the party that had walked out of the Helios summoning hall came south into Alberia. They had fought across 3 countries by then, and still could not match a top-ranked adventurer in a straight fight, and they knew it. They had the blade and the armor. The staff was next, and after the staff, a book nobody could find. The road to it ran through the Deepwood, where the mana would put a normal party on the ground, and their awakening meant it would not touch them. Marcus held that border, and he fed them privately, with his own family at the table. The beef came out on a board, and it was not what soldiers get. He told them, pleasantly, that the cattle were raised for meat and nothing else. Never worked, never bred for anything but the table, which is a thing no house on the continent can afford. Then he let it sit there and asked whether they wanted more. Ethan did the arithmetic. A border territory in a war going this badly should not look like this. The numbers did not come out, and he had been asked months ago to find out why. He put it down again. He had a demon lord to reach and a staff to collect, and a Margrave's accounts were not his assignment. He had a second helping. At the end of the evening, Marcus stopped being a host, and it was visible from across the table. He set his glass down and waited until all 3 of them were looking at him. You are going into the Deepwood tomorrow. You may see somebody in it. Nobody said anything. You will not be hostile, not to anyone you meet in that forest, not for any reason, whatever it looks like, and whatever it says to you. You will put your hands where they can be seen, and you will go around. He let that stand. This is a warning and not a request. Ethan said they understood and gave him his word on it, and Sarah and Hannah gave theirs after him, and not one of them asked who. The Kraken called her 2 days later. She went down through the buried door to the beach, where the salt works was boiling seawater in flat pans. The Kraken carried her an hour out across open water to an island she had never seen. In a clearing at the middle of that island stood a door on its own in the grass, with nothing on either side of it and nothing behind it. She opened it, and there was a room. It was a good room. Rugs, a bed, a table with books on it, lamps burning that nobody had filled. A woman sat up in the bed with her hands folded, dressed as though she were expecting company, and wished Nora a good afternoon. Her name was Alice. She took Nora for a hero, on the strength of the dark hair and the holy force sitting on the sword at her hip, and apologized for not staying. standing. Nora told her she was not a hero. The rest came out levelly, in order, like a report. The demon army had come into her country and taken it. Her family had not survived that. Somebody with the ability to do it had put her in this room about a week ago and had not come back. A skill that ran down her family line meant she needed no food and no water. She had been sitting in here since, and she did not cry at any point and did not raise her voice once. Through the small window was a courtyard that was nowhere near the island, and it was full of things that were not people, standing in it, waiting. Nora offered to take her out. Alice thought about it for perhaps 4 seconds and accepted, and remarked, in the same tone she had used for everything else, that a line that ends in a locked room has still ended. They walked out together. The door went as soon as she was through it, grass where it had been, and nothing standing in the clearing at all. She had known that would happen. She came anyway. Alice took the kraken better than most. She was startled for about a second, apologized for being startled, and asked whether it had a name. They talked on the way in. Somewhere past the halfway point, Alice asked what Nora's class was, the way a person asks what somebody does for a living. Tamer. Alice said that was interesting, and that she had never met one, and that it is rare because nobody chooses it. Then, pleasantly, with no malice in it anywhere, she said that in every country she knew of it was held to be the weakest thing a person can be. Then she asked how much further it was to the town. Nora did not answer the first part, not one word. She watched the water go past and let it stand. They were home before dark. Alice was given a room and asked for work before she had seen it. Inside a day, she had the intake lists, the ledgers, the stores, the rota, and the school register. Inside a week, nobody in Emberhold could find anything without asking her first. For 6 weeks, Emberhold had been run out of Nora's head. Alice put the whole of it on paper in 3 days. She started with pay, because nobody in the town had ever been paid in anything but food and a roof. Rates by trade, written down, posted where the workshop row could read them. Then the stores, then intake, then a list of what the town made and what it still had to buy. Nora handed her the setting of pay and the allocation of assets outright. She had worked out that Alice was better at this than she would ever be, and she did not mind. By the 3rd morning, Alice was the town's only trade liaison, and the only person who knew what Emberhold actually owned. 50 more came up the South Road at noon, mothers and children, the next installment of an agreement nobody discussed out loud. They were housed before dark, and the ones who had come without parents were matched to couples who had wanted children and never had them, with an allowance attached and a line each in the register. Maria asked whether that was normal anywhere else. Alice, still writing, told her it was not. Marcus came in with the wagons and went out with a contract he had not arrived expecting. Wallace negotiated it himself at a tailgate in about 10 minutes. Metal delivered on a schedule, processing at a rate that made Marcus put a hand over his mouth, and weapons out of that workshop for Marcus's own soldiers and nobody else in his kingdom, written into the terms in Wallace's own hand. Marcus took one blade with a cold edge on it and was so pleased that his captain asked whether the other elements were possible. Wallace said he would think about it and remarked to nobody in particular that it was not good yet to take too much work away from other people. Nora signed it, left Alice talking figures at Marcus across a wagon wheel, and went to the fire dungeon. The 5th floor of the fire dungeon had no boss in it, no stair down out of it, and nothing worth carrying home, which was the first thing about it that was wrong. Maria found the second. She walked the far wall twice and said the stone there was not doing what stone does. Behind it ran a passage, and at the end of it, a door standing on its own in the rock, the same kind as the ones buried under the barrens, which nobody had ever explained either. They went through it. On the other side was a cave, and outside the cave, the ground stopped. Below the drop lay grassland, then farmland in long strips, and past that, a village with roofs and smoke, and a track running between the houses. Maria looked at it a while and said what it was in one word: demons, which meant they were standing on the continent the invasions were supposed to come from. There was no wall around the village. Nothing came up the cliff at them. Nothing sounded an alarm, because there was nothing to sound one with. Then somebody spoke inside Nora's head, ascending from the village below, courteous, asking why they had come and whether they needed help getting down. Nora answered that they were fine, thank you. The voice said that was good, and went. Solomon asked about the walls twice that evening, and about the polite one only once. It was the first demon Nora had ever met who was neither attacking her nor frightened of her. What it had offered her was help. The steel tower took 2 days to reach and most of one to climb because the central stair was gone and they went up the outside. On the way in, Nora hired a mantis off the old rails at the station because its forelimbs went through the hardest metal in the labyrinth without slowing down and put it on the mine team. Its middle floor was a nest, and the metal slime burned all of that out in about a minute. Inside, the stairs to the top were intact. The top floor was full of crystal, standing floor to ceiling, and in one of the columns, there was a man. He was old. Insect wings lay folded flat down his back. 2 long antennae came off his brow, and the dust on the crystal had had time to take a shape. Nora got as far as thinking that Solomon ought to see this. Something went out of her hand. She had not sent it. The crystal came apart from the inside, quietly, the way ice goes off a window. The old man stepped out, went down on one knee in front of her, and thanked her for lifting a seal an evil god had put on him. Then he called her the successor of his king. "My name is Hugo," he told her, with his head still down, "and I served the king of the abyss. And if it please you, I would like to go back to work." Nora had never heard of abyss, and something in her chest accepted him before she had finished deciding whether she was going to. She felt it happen. It was not unpleasant, and it was not hers. She noticed. She raised it with nobody. Hugo was running the food stores inside a week. He called Victoria my lady until she threatened him. Inside 4 days, he had every scout creature in the valley linked to himself and a watch rota written out. The 12th floor opened onto countryside at dusk. Fields ran in strips down a shallow valley. A track went between them with cart ruts worn into it, low thatched houses along it, and light in some of the windows. An orc was working the near field with a hoe, taking his time. 2 goblins came up the track with a basket of vegetables between them and stopped to let a handcart pass. On the roof of the 3rd house, an ogre knelt with a bundle of thatch under one arm, making a poor job of mending it. Nothing attacked. There was no boss down there, and no sign anywhere that it was a floor at all. Victoria's hand went to the greatsword and stayed there. Maria did not move. Nora stood at the field edge with the shield down at her side and did not go in. And afterwards, she could not have said what she was waiting for. She had spent 6 weeks learning to tell a monster from somebody's neighbor, and the difference had just walked past her carrying a basket. The ogre came down off the roof and crossed the field, unhurried, and stopped a polite distance short. He spoke in clear, careful language, with the ends of the words finished. "Forgive me. Are you messengers from the king?" Nora told him they were not. He apologized for the mistake and asked whether they had come far. She answered him and could not afterwards remember what she had said. He mentioned that the house at the end of the track was empty if they were staying. They went back up the stairs. Halfway up, Victoria asked what that floor was for and got no answer out of anyone, including herself. It was the first floor Nora had ever left without doing anything on it. Solomon wanted to see the village at the bottom of the cliff, so 4 of them went down. Hugo came up out of the door, stopped, and said the air smelled like home. There was no wall around that village either. Traps? None. Solomon checked twice on the way in, once out of habit and once because he did not believe the first result. And nothing on the houses. No shutter worth the name, no ditch, no stakes, no watch post on the high ground, and the track ran up to the first door without a gate across it. A horned man came out to meet them, broad through the shoulders, wiping his hands, and treated the 4 of them as people of rank. Among demons, Solomon said later, power reads as rank. Hugo did the talking, being approachable and enormous at once, and the chief took them inside and put drink on the table. The village was 3 years old, the chief said, part of an expansion running the length of the continent. The land had been granted. The taxes were low enough that he gave the figure twice because he enjoyed saying it. When something came down out of the hills, they sent word, and monsters were lent to them to handle it, which was why nobody in the region had built a wall in years. Of the ruler who arranged all that he spoke warmly and at length. Serene was the word he reached for first, then generous. Then he said the thing everyone knew about Legion was that he was kind to people without minding who they were. Solomon asked how the monsters were controlled and was told, with no secrecy at all, that the king used copies of himself. He asked how long the arrangement had held, the better part of a decade. Then he stopped asking and sat with both hands flat on the table and set the cup down. "I knew Legion," he said, "not by reputation. I have sat across a table from him, and I have spent the last hour trying to fit that description onto him, and it will not go." Legion was cunning. If Legion wanted this world, he would have taken it with a knife and a rumor. He would have found the 3 men whose deaths set the human kingdoms at each other's throats, and had them dead inside a month, and then sat down and let the humans do the rest of the work for him. 1 room, 1 knife, 1 story put about afterwards by the right mouth. He would not throw 10,000 weak things at a wall, not in 1,000 years. Not once. There was nothing in it for him, and he was never wasteful in his life. Whatever has been coming at us is not Legion. Nobody answered him. Outside, somebody was calling children in off the track. Maria looked at Nora. Nora had nothing to give her. They thanked the chief for his time and left before dark, and on the whole way back, not one of them put a second name in the place of the first. 2 days later, they went back down with lunch. Solomon came because it sounded interesting. Victoria, who had been frightened of him for a fortnight when he arrived, spent the descent making jokes at his expense. The ogre was waiting near the same roof, which he had not finished. Nora told him they were not messengers and had no news at all, and asked him what this place was. "Then I will tell you where you are," he said. He told it plainly, and he did not once ask them to be sorry for him. This village and the 4 past the ridge are what is left of a kingdom. 2 people made it. One was a demon lord, and his name was Abyss. The other was a hero, and his name was Helios. And between them, they put every kind on that continent under one roof. Orcs, goblins, ogres, humans, elves, dwarves, demons. My grandfather was born in it and never thought it strange. Then there was a war, and the war went badly, and the cities went with it. Those of us who could not fight were brought here, all together, and the door was shut behind us, and we were told to wait for word. We have been waiting some years now. The children born here have never seen a sky that goes anywhere. So I will ask you plainly, do you have news of our king? He would not have lost. Tell me he did not lose." Nora did not tell him. She had the arithmetic before he finished. Nobody seals away the people who cannot fight while a war is going well. Somebody had put them behind a door, knowing which way it was going, and had done it to keep them alive. 3 times now. A crystal in a tower, a door with a god's work on it, an altar. Everyone had come open in front of her. Everyone had walked home with her afterwards, and nobody had ever explained why she was the one they opened for. Solomon stood at the edge of the track with his hands behind his back and said nothing on the way back either. Nora told him she was taking them on. She said it standing in a field with the shield still on her arm and no plan of any kind behind it. She was responsible for them from today. She would move them out when there was somewhere safe to move them to. Whatever their kingdom had lost, she would rebuild it. Until then, they were not waiting on their own anymore. The ogre thanked her formally and said he would tell the others that night. And then, after that, and not before it, the light came. It came up out of the ground and stood over the valley, and something spoke that did not use words, and it put 2 things into her at once: a post she had never applied for, and command, without condition, over everything the old king had ever sealed. She thought about Frost, she thought about Mason, and about Blight, and about the fact that she had named all 3 of them for no better reason than that their proper designations were too long to say. Nora answered it in 2 words. All right, the light went. Solomon was pointing at the top of her head, and so was Maria, and Victoria had both hands over her mouth. She had grown horns. Nobody in that field moved for a moment, the ogre included. The horns were gone by the next morning, which was a relief she discussed with nobody. Word came 3 days later, hours ahead of the army instead of minutes. Hugo's watch had them counted while they were still a long way out. Every civilian was inside Solomon's castle within the hour, on a route written down and walked twice. The black dragon and the slime went to the wall line, Solomon and Victoria to the evacuated. Nora took the field party out, Maria, Hugo, the rock dragon, and Blight. 10,000 on the ground, heavies behind them, and a flying element over the ridge first. Hugo went up alone to meet that. What he sent up went black across the whole of that sky for about 4 seconds, and when it cleared, there was nothing left flying. He came down and asked the new king whether he had been useful. Nora told him he had. The ground took until the middle of the day. The rock dragon opened the front of the line and went through what was behind it. Maria put fog across the low ground. One thing fired at her from cover and was on the payroll before it could fire again. Nothing maneuvered. The horde filled the gaps in its own line and came straight on, the way it had at the wall in spring, and that was the only reason any of it kept costing them nothing. The plane was clear by noon, no damage. Again, Nora walked the line afterwards and made one remark about the gap filling, and none at all about the 10,000. Blaine met her at the gate with a survey figure. The mana off the mountain deeper in the Deepwood had gone up again, well past anything the forest could account for. She said she would look at it after the next intake. They put a gathering on for Hugo that night, and most of the town came out to it. One of Walter's people had been measuring the harvest for a month and stood up on a bench to report it. Everything grown in Emberhold's ground carried a small permanent benefit: stamina, strength, how fast a cut closed over, tiny amounts, cumulative, and they did not wear off. Nobody stopped eating while he said it. The side effect had arrived before anyone connected it. The children could not be tired out anymore. Every household with children in it was now loaned a skeleton in the evening. evenings, to be run at until the children gave up first. Alice read out the number because somebody asked her for it. 152 people living in the valley. On the intake as agreed, 600 by autumn. Walter had been drinking since sundown. He came over with a cup in each hand, told her the place had got loud, and said he had built in 4 countries and never once seen ground go from nothing to this. You did this, he told her, in front of about 40 people. Then he sat down where he was standing. Solomon was at the fire at the far edge of the yard with Hugo beside him, the two of them talking about a king who had been dead long enough to turn into a bedtime story. He told her to sit down and then told her the story he liked best, which she had never heard before. There was a human, a long time ago, who got every kind to stand in the same place at the same time. Dwarves, elves, beastfolk, goblins, orcs, demons, humans. They built one country out of it, and for a while, everybody in it was happy. It had been his ideal, he said. 300 years on it, and he never managed it. And the people who might have helped him do it were long gone. He said it in the voice he used for the weather. Nora said she wanted the same thing. Hugo remarked from the other side of the fire that a new king inherits the will of the old one. She let that go past. Then she looked back at the yard. 150 people, lamps along the workshop row, a dwarf asleep on the ground with a cup still in his hand. And she said the rest of it out loud in front of people for the first time. They took me into the Deepwood and left me at the tree line, she said. That was meant to be a death sentence. It did not take. I made this. Every road out there, every roof, every field. I put the people on it, I pay for it, and it is mine. This is my town. Nobody is taking it off me. Not a demon lord, not a kingdom, not anybody who comes over that wall with an army behind him. I am going to make it bigger than this. Every kind in it. Monsters, demons, dwarves, elves, beastfolk, humans, all in one place, and all of them all right in it. And I will be the one who holds this land. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Hugo stood and knelt in the dirt beside the fire the way he had knelt in the tower, and stayed down until she told him to get up. Solomon said nothing at all. The fire went down, and behind them, the town slept. Nora put the fragment on the table, and Solomon turned it over twice before he spoke. It had come off the last field, one of the small control pieces Victoria had been cutting out of the hoard since the spring. He held it up into the window light and kept it there. The working in this is not his. I knew him. This is not how he thinks. She asked if he was certain. He put the fragment down and told her he had been certain for a while and had been waiting to turn out wrong. So there were 2 things wearing the same name. He would keep the piece and go on with it. Nobody in the room put a second name in the empty space because nobody had one. The rest of the morning was ordinary. The slime cleared the field and nothing came off it worth carrying home. The light caster she had taken the week before went into the infirmary with a job and a name. The town had wanted a physician for a month, and Silas fitted in the register better than what he had been called before. Day 49 ended with fish. Day 50 began with rice. That was still not right. The sea was under survey. The desert was under survey. The mountain deeper in the Deepwood, the one Blaine had put a figure to twice, had never been walked on by anybody. She had spent the whole morning being told that nobody knew what was attacking her town. So she took Maria and went to look at the one thing near it that nobody had ever looked at. The griffin put them down on a shelf of bare rock above the tree line, and Maria said the mana up here was worse than the labyrinth. Nora had read the figures. She had not expected to feel them in her teeth. Nothing grew on the shelf, and the trees stopped a long way below it in a clean line. At the top, there was a building, stone, square, very old, with a wide flat step across the front of it. Set into the face of the building was a gate. She had seen enough by now to know one without asking, and this one stood open. Something was lying on the step in front of it. It was a person, face down, one arm out, in armor that had been white and gold before whatever happened to it happened. Maria stopped where she was and said quietly that it was not moving. Nora crossed the shelf. Close up, the plate was split along one side. The surcoat under it had gone dark and stiff, and the hands were young. She went down on one knee, got a grip under the shoulder plate, and turned him over. They had him off the mountain in under an hour. He was breathing when they found him, and evenly, by dark. They laid him on a long table in the castle and sat with him in shifts. Solomon took the first. Hugo took the second. Wallace sat through the middle of the night and reported that the boy had not moved once, and that his gear was foreign work and very good. Nora was no use at sitting still. She went down to the mine floor with the red ogre and the metal slime, spent the day's tame on a gold golem, and brought it home like a woman back from a market. Maria said, "Thank you the way you thank somebody for a coat you did not ask for." 20 minutes later, she came back out and was enthusiastic about it at length, and slightly too late to be convincing. So she had been worrying her. Nora had not worked that out on her own, and did not know what to do with it, so she told Maria the golem was hers. Hugo came across the yard at a walk that was somehow quicker than most people run. The young man was awake, he said, and calm about it, which he appeared to find the more remarkable half of the news. Nora went to the kitchen, put something light on a tray, and walked up to the castle. The room had one lamp lit and a window with the day going out of it. He was propped up on a folded blanket at the end of the table with his hands in his lap. Out of the armor, he was 19 years old. Nora put the tray down where he could reach it. He looked at the food. Then he looked up at her, and something moved in his face that had nothing to do with food at all. "You were the fifth one," he said. She did not answer. "On the circle." He was not asking her. "You were standing on the circle with us?" A long way below the window, somebody was calling the cows in for the evening, and whoever it was took their time about it. Neither of them said anything while it went on. Nora waited until it had finished. Yes, that was the whole of what either of them said about it. Not that evening, and not once afterwards. He asked about the other three. They had gone into the dungeon at the top of the mountain looking for a staff. One of them had put a hand on it, and the floor had taken all four of them and set them down in 4 different places. He had come out of it on the step in front of the gate and had not been able to get up again. Where they were now, he did not know. He had no way to look. He had come out with what he was wearing and nothing else at all. Then he asked her for help. Nothing was offered first. He had nothing to offer. He did not pretend otherwise, and he did not dress the asking up. He was alive because a scout on the ridge had reported a shape on that summit that was not rock. He was alive because there were griffins standing in her yard that could be on a mountain inside the hour, and because there was a physician in her infirmary who had been given the job 4 days earlier. She had built every one of those things herself, out of nothing, in 50 days. In 50 days, she had not asked anybody in this world for anything. Nora sat down on the edge of the table. "You can stay here as long as you need. We will start looking tomorrow." He began to say something else. She pushed the tray an inch closer to him, and he stopped and ate instead. The soup went, and about half the bread, and then he asked whether he could keep the bowl until morning. She told him he could keep it as long as he liked, turned the lamp down 1 notch on her way past it, and left him the light. He came up out of the dark, and there was a skeleton leaning over him. His hand went for a sword that was not on his hip, and his body did not finish the movement, and he would be grateful for that for the rest of his life. The skeleton stopped. It waited. Then it went back to changing the dressing on his side, and it did that job better than anyone had ever done it for him. He apologized twice. It did not answer either time, and he worked out later that it never answered anybody. Then he did what he always did when he was frightened, which was appraise the room. Nothing in the room made sense. The old gentleman in the high-collared coat brought him water, called him young sir, and had an entry longer than any he had read on a living thing. The swordswoman who put her head round the door carried numbers no swordswoman has a right to. Worst of all was the courteous old man in black, who sat down beside him and asked how he was feeling. The skill printed Great Demon Lord. Under that, it printed something called Hero Killer, and while he was still reading it, the old man answered a question he had not asked out loud. He was told not to worry about the gap. Then, pleasantly, the old man asked what a hero was intending to do about a demon lord. Ethan said he only went after things that were actively harming people, and that his skill had not shown him one intent of that kind anywhere in this town. He had been looking since he opened his eyes. The old man studied him for a while, said that was a satisfactory answer, mentioned that the chief of the town was on her way up, and went out. Ethan looked at the window. He was 1 floor up and he could fly. He thought about it seriously for about 4 seconds. Then the door opened. She came in with a tray, and he knew her before she was 2 steps into the room. Out of pure habit, he had appraised her in the doorway, and then wished very badly that he had not. She had been in the room, and then she had not been in the room, and nobody had told him where she went, and he had not asked. He had been busy that day. He had been given a great deal, and there had been a lot of it to look at. That was the whole of it. Arriving at once, in a room where he could not stand up. Somebody had once put an errand in front of him about a town in the south that was doing better than it had any business doing. He never went. It did not occur to him, then or later, that he was lying in it. He went through everything he had. There was nothing in any of it that was not obscene. So he said hello. He said thank you for the food. He said none of the rest of it, then or ever. Day 51. 7 of them at that table, and not one of them from anywhere near here. Breakfast was rice, soup, grilled fish, and pickles. It was food from where she was from, and from where he was from, and the kitchen had got it right on the third attempt. Ethan picked the bowl up in both hands and stopped. Then he ate and cried while he was eating, and did not stop doing either of those things. Nobody spoke. Hugo looked at the ceiling. Victoria looked at her hands. Alice went on pouring tea. Maria looked at Nora. 50 days. Nora reached over, took the bowl out of his hands, filled it again, and put it back in front of him. "There is plenty," she said. "Have as much as you want." That was all of it. That was the entire answer she gave him, and she never gave him another one. He had 3 bowls. Solomon sent down for more fish. 2 days later, he was on his feet, and he was courteous to everything in the town, the creatures included, and to Silas most of all, which Nora noticed and did not mention. She asked him what he could actually do: flight, teleportation, storage he could put a wagon in, an appraisal that read a person off their face, and one more, which he mentioned last and almost apologetically. Anything he had watched somebody do once, he could do. Wallace spoke without looking up from the bench. The last one had damage nullification, fatigue immunity, status immunity, every weapon there is at master. He put a file down. His own people sealed him for it. A man you cannot put down is a problem with no answer in it. All of that came out in the voice he used for metal, and then he went back to work. Nora thought once, and with no heat in it, that heroes got all of that. Then she asked Ethan to put the shrine dungeon first. He agreed, offered to do any labor she had going afterwards, and meant both halves of it. She decided to trust him. Day 52. Solomon wanted the staff dungeon looked over for rare creatures, so they went, and between his teleport and Ethan's flight, the summit took 11 minutes. Ethan said he could not normally move like that, and that it was the food doing it. Nobody explained the food to him. Inside, the place was a cave built like the underside of a tree, all root and hollow. Solomon skipped 9 floors in one step and handled anything on the way himself. The door at the end had a bird cut into it. Ethan stopped in front of that door and said he had never wanted to see it again. They opened it. What was inside was white and had a hawk's eyes and wings that went most of the way across the chamber. Nora spent the day's tame on it. There was no fight. There was nothing. It came down off the ledge and stood there waiting to be told where to go. For a moment, Ethan did not say anything. Then, so that is what it means. Nobody filled the silence after that. Solomon agreed that it was terrible. The thing canceled every buff and every curse on a field, and could still put enough wind under itself for comfortable flying. It could not be in the same place as the sealed dragon, which finally explained why she had never managed to bring that one down here. It went up to the surface that afternoon and onto the roster as the White Guardian. Below the boss room, the stairs went down a long way and ended at a spring with an altar standing in the middle of it. There was nothing on the altar. Ethan said one of them had put a hand on the staff and had been gone before it left the stone. Solomon walked the edge of the pool twice, reading what was left in the water, and then said the thing that changed the week. This was not an attack. He crouched and put 2 fingers flat on the wet rock. The tree said it. It used the lines under the floor, and it put the 4 of you somewhere else on purpose. Splitting a party is a cruel way to test one. It is still a test, so they were alive. Somewhere, separately, being examined. Nora told Ethan to stay in the town and train under Solomon, and said that when the others turned up, there would be meals for them too. She meant it as housekeeping. He took it as a great deal more. Solomon suggested that the 2 of them might go through the fire labyrinth to the demon continent later and look at the war themselves, since he still did not believe the name everybody was using. He left the remark where it fell. Nobody picked it up. Then, Ethan got off the rock he was sitting on, went down on one knee in front of a great demon lord with 2 people watching, and asked to be trained. If a word of that ever left the room, it would end several careers, and one of them would be his. Nora filed it and said nothing. He asked after that whether he could help in the kitchen, because he had cooked for a living before any of this started. She agreed immediately. For 7 weeks, she had been trying to get the food of home out of that kitchen by describing it badly. Now she had a man who knew how. Walking up the stairs, she counted what was living in her town: a demon lord, a hero, an ancient steward, an elf king, a dwarf who could not be trusted around wine, and a great many things with more legs than that. Somewhere on the same flight of steps, she settled the war. She was never going to join the campaign. She was going to make every single person in it want to live here instead. Day 53. Breakfast was a pastry made from something Ethan had written down for the kitchen, and Maria's tea had improved, which was Alice's doing, and Nora was more pleased about the tea than the pastry. Then the Kraken called her. So she took Maria and rode out to the island where Alice's door had been. There was a second door at the center of it. Nora went through first. Behind it, a passage ran back into the rock, with rooms cut into both walls, every one of them standing open and empty. Something was at the far end of it. They walked a long way to reach him. The last room was not open. It was held shut by a ceiling, and there was a man sitting on the floor inside with his back against the stone. He said hello. It took him 2 attempts, because he had not used his voice in 300 years. His account was short. He had been a hero. He had put down the demon king of his day by the straightforward method of not being possible to hurt, and then he had gone home. A king who came after that one worked out that a man who cannot be killed is a problem that never stops being a problem. So they had put him here. He said it the way another man would give directions to a market. Then he asked to be let out, and mentioned without any feeling at all that he was almost certainly not strong enough to be a nuisance to anyone now. Nora broke the ceiling. She did not negotiate, and she did not ask him for terms. And afterwards, she could not remember the part where she decided. She offered him Emberhold, food, work, a roof, whatever he wanted out of it. He turned it down. He wanted to walk. He wanted to see what the world had done with itself while he was not in it, and he would rather find that out with his feet. Maybe he would come by, he said, later, if it was still there. Then he went up the passage and out into the daylight and did not look back. Maria asked what she was thinking about, and Nora took long enough to answer that Maria stopped waiting for it. Wallace had been called into this world on his own. 300 years ago, he had won. The people who called him put him out of the country for it. The man in the passage had been called into this world. He had won. The king he won it for put him in a room under an island. And her, 3 of them, spread across 3 centuries, and the same room every time, with different people standing in it. Nobody had hated her. Nobody had needed to. It was not personal. It had never once been personal. And it was not even cruelty. It was procedure. She turned that over twice, put it where she put things, and asked Maria what the kitchen was doing about dinner. Solomon woke her before the light to ask what she had done. She had not done anything. He pointed out of the window anyway. Her slime was standing in the yard at 4 times the size it had been the day before. Maria had come home the evening before with the only thing left alive in a village the slimes there had already finished with. It was a slime that talked, and she had claimed her as a sister inside the hour. Overnight, the 2 of them had traded something between themselves without asking anybody. Hers could go giant now. The newcomer could change what her own fluid was made of. The metal slime could do both, and demonstrated by becoming a great deal of silver. Solomon thought the cause was her. Nora had not been aware of any cause at all, and did not enjoy hearing about it. She went and found Wallace and told him plainly that he could research it if he liked, and that nothing was ever to be built that made her creatures do things they hated. He agreed at once, and then produced a mortar for the skeleton crews, a light cannon, and a case of munitions for anything that flew. Nora looked at all 3, said her air combination was more practical, and left them on the bench. Dinner that night was curry. It did not exist in this world. The kitchen had never seen it. The table did not trust it, and Victoria asked out loud whether it was supposed to be that color. Then everybody ate. The argument was over inside a minute, and Alice wanted to know whether it could be done on a schedule. Nora had 3 helpings and went to bed happy. Day 54. Hugo had it an hour out. 2 forces of about 50,000 each, on angles slightly different, time to arrive together. 100,000 in total, heavies in both, and a flying element larger than anything that had come at them before. There was no meeting. Nora said which column she was taking, and everybody was already moving. Hugo, Maria, the sealed dragon, and Ethan went for the far one. Solomon held the town. Her group was on the near column inside the hour. The frost dragons she and Maria had taken off the 13th floor the week before went up first. The white guardian went up with them and canceled the wind the other side was flying on, and after that, nothing in the air could reach them. The rock dragon cleared most of what was left up there in one pass. On the ground, it was the slimes. The big one stood out in the open and threw magic on a scale it had no business throwing. The metal slime rode on its shoulder and fired into the heavies without stopping. The pair of them looked like a villain riding a machine. Nora watched them for a while and decided not to say so out loud. Before the middle of the day, the near column stopped moving forward. Nothing got within sight of the wall. She made a note that putting her creatures together on purpose was worth doing, and went to find the other column. By the time they crossed, there was not much of the second column left. The sealed dragon had taken a large share, and the rest of the party most of the remainder. Ethan asked whether he could finish it. Then he asked the sealed dragon to pull back first, because he did not want anything of hers caught in what he was about to do. The metal slime put itself between the light and Nora and Maria before anybody told it to. What he used, he had watched a dragon do once. There was a flash, and it lasted longer than a flash has any right to. And when it stopped, there was nothing standing on that ground, and the ground itself had gone to glass. Nobody in the town was touched. The slime was left to clear up, and they went home. The hall that night had more food in it than the town had owned in its whole first month. Several of the dishes existed because Ethan had written them down for the kitchen that afternoon. Maria and Alice made sweets in the middle of the floor and would not let anybody help. Solomon and Hugo talked in a corner about something neither brought to the table. Wallace drank with Walter and the dwarves, which he did not need to do and did anyway. Victoria talked at Blaine for an hour. Nora sat at the end of a bench with Ethan and ate. He told her the front had been going badly for a season before the tree took them, and that his kingdom had been giving ground on both sides of it. There was nothing in his voice that asked her for anything. Then he wanted to know whether there was any more of the fried thing. She had 100 creatures, a mountain, a labyrinth, and a great demon lord who did her shopping. He had one skill that copied what he saw, a war behind him that was already losing, and all of it put into his hands at 19. Nobody else in that hall could see both of those at the same time. There was nothing she could do with it. She could not get it into a sentence, and she did not try. "Eat well," she said. "You earned it. There is plenty." He thanked her and had more. The hall looked bigger than it had the week before. Nora noticed it, decided it could wait, and mentioned it to nobody. Ethan fell asleep at the end of the bench with a cup still in his hand, and nobody woke him. The call came up off the mine floor just before noon on day 56, and it was the first one her own people had ever sent. Something had blocked the tunnel. One of the heavies was down, and nothing in this world had put one of hers down before. She took the metal slime and went herself. Nobody offered to go instead. They had stopped offering weeks ago. It sat on the slope above the tunnel mouth, long and low, plated in something that moved like water and held like plate. Not quite a dragon. She tamed it, and the tunnel was clear before the shift ended. That evening, she made a second one, because 2 of a thing is a patrol, and 1 is a curiosity, and put the pair on air reconnaissance. Then she named them. The children thought they were the best thing anybody had ever brought home. Ethan agreed about the look of them, and suggested carefully that the name might want another try, and Solomon had been waiting all week for an opening like that. Nora said the name was fine. She was outvoted, including by the dwarves, who had not been asked, and made more of them anyway because they looked good. Marcus came in at noon the next day with more wagons than the trade ground had room for. Nora handed him to Alice at the gate, and said to send for her only if something could not be solved. He looked delighted. He had been after Alice for 2 months. 50 new residents came off the carts, 35 of them children. Alice had the intake list started before the last wagon was unhitched, and put the valley at 202 that evening. He asked whether he could open a shop. The land had been set aside for one since the 2nd month, and she told him where. While Alice did the contracts, Nora went along the crates at the back, which held dungeon relics, things that come up out of the deep floors with nothing to explain them. There was a pen in the 3rd crate, no ink left in it. She turned it over and put it back. A flat stamped piece out of a machine with 4 screw holes. Something with a glass face, broken, made to be worn on a wrist. A cheap folding knife with a plastic scale on the handle. She stood there a while. At the bottom was an engine out of some kind of vehicle, seized solid. That one she bought at the asking price, because Wallace would be happy for a week. Nothing else, and not a word about any of it. There were 2 other people in this world who had come from where she came from. One was in the kitchen, and one was in the workshop row, and she went past both of them that afternoon. Solomon wanted 2 floors cleared before he left, so he sent her down with Ethan, water on the 5th. He held an air layer around them both with holy force and was very pleased with himself. Nora found out that she cannot speak underwater, which left her the least useful person on the floor, and he ended that boss himself. Desert on the 6th, bare stone, no water, and things living in it that had solved that. Their boss stood on the horizon, and she took it for a mountain range for most of an hour because it was not moving. Ethan looked at it for a long time. "That one we cannot beat," he said. He was the hero. Until that afternoon, there had not been a thing in this world he could not handle. So she tamed it, and it worked. It crushes things by walking, which is most of what it does, and carries a forest on its back, and does not appear to mind. Bringing it home took 2 days of logistics. Nothing in the valley could take its weight, so they walked it onto the flats a long way south, where the only thing it can step on is more flats. Solomon went out to look. He was quiet a while, then said the world was larger than he had been accounting for, and she had never heard him say that about anything. He and Ethan left through the labyrinth the next morning, and the castle was left to Alice and Hugo. Alice asked for an hour of her time 3 days later and brought a drawing up onto the wall. It was the town. It was also not the town, because most of what was on the paper did not exist. The core stays where it is. She flattened the corner against the stone with 2 fingers. First ring is the wall you are standing on. Housing, workshops, the school, sized for 1,000. Then her hand moved outward. Second ring, 10,000. Third, 50,000. Fourth, 100,000. Ground was marked for shops and public buildings inside each one. In a hand so small, Nora had to lean in. Moats around every wall fed off the Deepwood River and stocked because water that feeds people is easier to argue for. The engines Wallace kept building would be crewed by monsters and raised labor and never by a person. Already policy, now written down. Then came the part she was firm about. Every human resident, whatever their trade, does weapon training 1 day a week. Mandatory, no exemptions. Nora asked why, given that between the creatures and the wall, there was not much left for a farrier to do. Alice tapped the ring line once. Because then it is theirs, not yours. She was more insistent about that line than about the moats or the rings or the 100,000, and she did not explain it. Nora, who knew exactly what room Alice had been sitting in when they met, did not ask. Food stood at 150% of what the valley ate and would hold through 50,000 if the fields went where they were drawn. Meat was the constraint, and the raised workforce was already short. Nora was still working through the meat when Alice reached the last item on the paper. "This land belongs to no country," Alice said. "There is no border on it and no crown over it, so we will found one." She said it in exactly the tone she had used for the moats. Nora took a moment, then asked what that would make her exactly. Alice told her in the same voice and used the words head of state with no decoration on them at all. Going red to the ears, Nora said they would talk about the meat and went down off the wall with a list. She did not say no. Dinner the night before had been 5 people at a table laid for 7. Alice said twice, unprompted, that she was not lonely and went pink both times. In the morning, the watch reported 1 man on the road, walking, alone. His name was Xavier, special rank, guild, and an old acquaintance of Victoria's, which was the only reason they had sent him. He got about 8 words into the recall order. "No," Victoria said. He nodded, folded the paper away, and did not argue. He had known before he set out. Then he gave them the rest, because he had been told to tell anybody with a sword. Attacks are up everywhere, not one front, all of them. Villages that never saw a monster in living memory are getting hit twice in a season. He counted it off flatly, the way a man does who has said the same thing in 11 towns. Demons confirmed in the field. Special ranks moved about so fast that half of them are fighting tired. We cover maybe 2 claims in 5. Nora asked what the guild's own estimate was. "At this rate, we lose," he said. "Not this year, but we lose." Nobody said anything. "And the hero is missing." That part he said to the ground. 2 months. No word from him, none from his party. The church has not put it in writing yet. Nora told him that was very bad news. Nobody corrected him. Victoria asked him to leave her name out of his report, and he said he had decided that on the way in. Then she told him to wait and went across the yard at a run. She came back with a holy blade and put it into his hands. He got both arms under it and still nearly dropped it, and asked whether that was really all right. "We have several," Nora told him. "That one is hers? She bought it." He looked at the blade, then at the town behind her, and said this place was insane. Nora agreed with him privately and gave him a bag of food for the road. Down the road he went, still looking at the sword. Victoria watched him out of sight and then wondered aloud whether she had been allowed to do that. Nora told her it was fine. The blade would get used on things that hurt people, which was more than it was doing on Iraq. They had been on the continent 9 days, moving the fast way between towns and taking a carriage for the last part of every road, because a carriage is where people talk. An elderly couple shared the bench opposite them out of a market town, and Ethan asked what the ruler here was like. They lit up. Legion was a good lord, the old man said. Taxes low, roads kept, and any village that asked for help against beasts got monsters on loan and a man to run them, free. His wife added that theirs had one standing in the square through 2 winters, and it never so much as looked at a child. Neither of them was performing for the foreigner in the good coat. About a mile on, Ethan worked out how the lending was done. Whatever was inside those monsters that made them obey was a piece of Legion himself, put there on purpose. Solomon said nothing for the rest of the road. The village was already burning when they came over the rise. Whatever was in it had the same shape as the hordes that had been walking into the Deepwood all season. No formation, no commander, no interest in anything except damage. It took the two of them under a quarter of an hour. Solomon went through what remained and came back holding a control fragment up between two fingers. Then another. Then he stopped bothering to show them. They were in every one of the attackers, and they were the same pieces Victoria had been cutting out of hordes on the other side of the world since the spring. On this continent, they are also the thing a village asks for when it needs protecting. A farmer thanked them and asked whether they were guild. Ethan told him no. The man said the official's standing order was to reach the next village and send word to the capital, and then he went and did exactly that. Neither of them could explain what they were holding. On the hill, with the smoke still visible behind them, Ethan asked what the invasion was for. Solomon took it seriously, which he did not always, and answered in order. Territory. No, he was standing, and he stayed standing. Nothing is held. Nothing is garrisoned. They walk into a place, they break it, and what is left of them walks out again. You do not take ground by burning it and leaving. Second, a show of strength. Also, no, nobody has claimed one of these. There are no demands attached to any of it. A demonstration nobody signs is not a demonstration. Then the third, and he slowed down over it. And it is not how he works. He keeps villages. He lends them guards. Those two in the carriage were not lying, and they were not afraid of him. He has held this continent for centuries by being worth having, and tonight, his own fragments were inside the things burning his own farmland. Ethan said that meant somebody was using his name. Somebody is using him, Solomon said. He was quiet a while. Then he said that Legion is a colony rather than a body, and that taking a piece off him does not kill him. It only leaves him with less. He had known it for centuries and had never had a reason to say it aloud. And then he stopped talking altogether, long enough that Ethan asked whether he was all right. There was a hero. Solomon had not moved. Centuries ago, the church called him light. I killed him myself, and I have been certain of that for a very long time. The skill the man carried consumed a living thing and took everything it had been. Not its strength, everything, its race, its traits, whatever was unique to it. If a man can live inside the thing he eats, Solomon said, then he never needed to survive what I did to him. He only needed something standing close enough at the time. He assembled the rest out loud, one piece at a time, and softened none of it. Something ate Legion. It is wearing him. It has the fragments and the replication and the name. And it is not conquering anything because it does not want this continent or any other. It wants the world too confused to work out who is doing this to it. Ethan said, after a moment, that if that was true, then the evil he had been summoned here to destroy was a hero, and that it would probably fall to him to end the man. Solomon did not tell him he was wrong. We will go and ask Legion directly, he said, and I hope very much that I am talking nonsense. He did not sit down after that. He did not sleep either. The first time they came onto that floor, Victoria would not go near the thing in the last chamber. Neither would Maria. Neither of them had ever refused anything. It was a black tiger in a feathered robe, sitting up, watching them come in the way a magistrate watches a queue. It was not evil. All three of them could tell, and none of them could have said how. The day's tame was already spent, so there was no choice to make. They backed out and it let them, which it did not have to do. She came back 3 days later and tamed it without a fight, and it was surprised. The black dragon had made the same face. A chest turned up behind it once that was settled, and Victoria got it open the careful way. 2 rings inside. One was no use to anybody. Nora picked up the other and read what it did. It gives back magic, all of it, emptied to full, as often as she likes. The price for each use is a life, given willingly by somebody standing there. No, she said, and put it back in the box, and closed the lid. Nobody argued. Victoria did not ask her to think about it. Maria looked at the box once, and then did not look at it again. That ring would have taken the ceiling off her. No more choosing what a day got spent on. No more leaving something like the tiger in a chamber for 3 days waiting on her diary. She left it on the 8th floor in a box. On the way up, she said she wanted somewhere in town where people could sit and have tea with the cats, once there were enough of them. Victoria called that diabolical. Maria volunteered before anybody had asked for staff, and the tiger was washed the moment they got home. The warning came while she was walking to the kitchen. 100 dragons on the north approach, and 1 demon on the ground underneath them. She called Maria, the slimes, the white guardian, and the 2 frost dragons, and set the objective on the way out. End it clean, and keep anything still standing at the finish. Sky first. The Guardian took the breath out of it. The frost dragons put the fire types onto the ground and held the earth types where they stood, and Maria was in several places at once. The slime went up to full size and reached. It did not take the whole morning. The demon on the ground had not moved through any of it. She walked up and tried to tame him, and nothing happened, which had never happened before. It does not work on people. She had simply never had cause to find out. He put his weapon down before she asked and told her to kill him and be done with it. Nora said she would rather talk and asked somebody to bring out a chair. His name was Van. His clan and their dragons were being held by the thing wearing the demon lord's name, and he had been sent here on a promise that they would be let go afterwards. He recited it like the terms of his own funeral. Maria volunteered before Nora had finished thinking about it. She can enter a village without being seen and take a room without a fight, and both had been proved twice. They sent the metal slime with her, which is strong and looks like nothing. Nora put the price to him out loud rather than let him guess. They get their people back, and afterwards, every one of them lives here as residents, under her law. He accepted. He had nothing to trade and did not pretend otherwise. They left at first light, out past the Deepwood and under the mountain, which was half a month there and back. Maria took the assignment like a birthday. She bowed at the gate, which nobody had asked her to do, and told Nora she would not be long. Watching them onto the road, Nora was already deciding what to give her when she got home. 100 dragons is a great deal of material, and Alice had it organized with the dwarves before the middle of the morning. Hugo caught her on the stairs to say he was rebuilding the warning network so word would travel faster next time. Alice had also had everything that might be carrying a fragment disposed of, quietly, first thing, because nobody knows what a fragment does, and she was not going to find out inside her own walls. Nobody had asked her to. It was the first time anybody had protected the town from something Nora had not thought of. Wanting one particular cut off one particular dragon, Nora went down to the kitchen, and Alice was already there with it. They ate at the end of the long table with a jug of citrus water between them. Nora said she would take Victoria down for the day's tame after this. Then she stayed where she was and did not go. The house was very quiet. 2 of them were on another continent. One was under a mountain, and the metal slime, which had gone everywhere with her since the day she carried it out of the wards under Solomon's castle, was under it as well. Alice put her cup down. "You are lonely," she said. Nora considered it the way she considered a figure Alice had put in front of her. Then she said it was probably right and got up and went down to work anyway. They had been putting the 15th floor off for days, and on day 62, they went down and did it. Victoria remembered on the stairs that something was sealed on every 5th floor. She said it the way a person says a thing they have already decided not to worry about. The shrine was burning when they came out onto it. Black stone, an open vault overhead, and a dragon lying the length of the room in black and red, big enough that it took a moment to find the head. She tamed it from outside the boss area. That was standard practice now, and neither of them said anything about it. The appraisal called it a legendary fire dragon and noted that it preferred melting things to fighting them. Victoria stopped on the top step. There is a story about that one. A mountain, apparently. A castle town under the mountain. The mountain had come down as liquid rock and the town had never been rebuilt. Nora asked whether anybody lived there now. Victoria said that was rather the point of the story. They surfaced before the middle of the afternoon. The dwarves took the dragon for armor plate and magical tooling, and what it shed went to the kitchens. Emberhold's newest building was a bathhouse. The place sat on the lower street where the ground fell away toward the water, stone to the roofline, with a furnace room at one end and shutters set high in the wall to let the steam out. The dwarves had put it up in 11 days and had been unpleasant to everybody for 9 of them. It was paid for out of tax. That was the part Nora kept turning over. Emberhold collected taxes now. Alice had built the thing that collected them, and the money had started coming in, and money that comes in has to be spent on something. She had put a list in front of Nora with 6 items on it. The bathhouse had been 4th on that list and had gone to the top because the field crews were washing in the river and the kitchens drew from the same stretch of river. There was no fee at the door, no ticket, no counting, no register of who had used it, and no register of who had not. Every resident, as often as they liked, at no charge, because it had already been paid for by everybody at once. The dwarves had then decided, without consulting anyone, that a person who would not wash had no business standing near a forge. That made it effectively compulsory for about 1/3 of the town. Nora walked the length of the building and asked about the drains. One of the crew took her round the back and showed her where the run went, and told her twice that the fall was correct. Alice found her there with the day's report. The hide off the dragon was going to armor, the bone and horn to the tooling benches, and the shed material was already in the kitchens. "They are doing 3 things with it tonight," Alice said. "One of them is a soup." Nora asked which of the 3 she should have. "All of them." Alice wrote something in the book without looking up. Nobody in the building mentioned the dragon. 2 women off the intake were arguing about the temperature of the second room. A child had been sent back out for being loud and was appealing the decision. The dwarf came back to say, unprompted, that the fall on the drains was correct. Alice ate 5 of the small breads to Nora's one, and then said something about the wheat. She held up the last of hers. "This is better than anything I ate at home, and I ate very well at home. There was a bakery that supplied the crown, and this is better than that." Nobody at the table looked up. The bread went round, the pot went round. One of the kitchen crew came in for the empty tray and did not look at the bread either. Alice turned her cup a quarter turn on the table and said the quality was a problem. "If we sell what we make for what it is worth, nobody within a month's ride can pay for it," she said. "And if we sell it for what they can pay, we take in more coin in 1 season than the whole region holds." Nora asked what happened then. "Then the coin stops meaning anything. Copper first, then silver. Prices go up in every market between here and the sea. Wages do not, and the people who had just enough stop having enough. They will not know why, and they will be right that it was not their doing." She did not say how she knew that. Nora did not ask her. "Then you run it," Nora said. "The trade, the pricing, what we sell and what we do not. Tell me what you decide and I will sign whatever needs signing." Alice asked whether she wanted to hear the reasoning first. She said no and meant it, and reached for the pot. Alice wrote it down. Then she said that sooner or later, Emberhold would have to mint its own coin, because it could not go on running on somebody else's. Nora told her to put it on the list. Wallace stopped her on patrol to show her something. He had a ballista on a wall carriage, and a plate of dragon scale set up 500 meters down the range. He fired it once. The plate was not a plate anymore. That shot would still have carried to a kilometer. Loading it took a heavy or 4 adults who did not mind the work. Testing had been simple, he said, because they had had more dragon material this month than anybody knew what to do with. And he was extremely happy about that. And he said the walls were now a different proposition entirely. It was for sale. Marcus was buying. His borders had been getting worse all year, and this was something Emberhold could put in his hands that kept the arrangement mutual, which mattered to both of them. There were 6 more things in development for him specifically, all of them cheap. All of them built for people who were never going to have a tamer standing in front of them. Then Wallace showed her the other list. Nothing on that list was for sale at any price. A rail weapon that fired on the magic of hundreds of casters at once and would go through several dragons standing in a line. An adamantine sword, a shield, and a set of armor, all of them blessed. A staff built around a dragon's stone. Marcus had already turned every item of it down, not because he did not want it, because nobody could put a number on it, and a merchant cannot buy a thing that has no number against it. So it went to residents instead, cheaply. Nora stood and read the list twice. Then she looked at the wall behind them, where the engines already carried adamantine heads, and at the patrol going past with blessed and magical blades on their hips as a matter of course. Wallace said there was one more thing on his bench, and that he would not be selling that either. He did not show her what it was. Hugo brought the numbers before the middle of the morning. 50,000 rank and file, 10 dragons, and 2 heavy rock dragons behind them. It was a large monster engagement, which meant the thing on the flats finally had a reason to move. Victoria heard that and decided to come at full effort. They met it an hour out. Nora up on her rock dragon, Victoria on foot, 2 frost dragons, and the mountain coming along behind all of them at its own speed. Nora gave the mountain one instruction: do not step on Victoria. Victoria went in first. Her opening cut took dozens. She adjusted for area and took the next 100 and stopped counting after that. The frost dragons came down on the front rank and froze it where it stood, and the ranks behind walked into the back of it and stopped. Then the mountain fired once, and 10,000 of them were not there anymore. The dragons in the air lasted about as long as it took to reach them. One of the heavies charged the mountain and was stepped on without any break in stride. The other went for her rock dragon, and that one was a duel, 1 against 1, and hers pushed it backwards across open ground the whole way. Then something small came out of the other one under the strain and dropped into the grass, and it seized up mid-movement and lost. Nora had seen that happen before. She did not go and look at it. Her dragon did not finish it. It stood over the thing and then turned its head and looked at her, and went on looking. It wanted to keep it, so she tamed it and sent back for the healer and the slime. Victoria went in to report. 50,000, 10 dragons, 2 heavies, no damage. Gate to gate, the whole thing took under an hour, and most of that was the walk. Naming the new one took longer than the battle had. The dwarves proposed something. Her first dragon, the one from her first day in this world, would not have it, and made that clear in a way that stopped work across the entire yard for a minute and a half. The second proposal went through without discussion. Adult dragon material went onto the benches that evening, and the crews and the creatures worked it in shifts. Nora stood at the rail a while watching the benches go, and wondered whether those dragons had belonged to Van's people. There was nobody in the valley she could have asked. At the meal, Alice set a page down beside her plate. Nora said, "Not tonight." Alice took the page back and did not say anything, and the two of them got through the rest of the meal politely enough. Neither of them mentioned it again, that evening or afterwards. 5 days since Solomon and Ethan had gone across to the other continent, and no word off them. She asked Alice how long the crossing took, which was not the thing she wanted to know. Alice gave her the figure, and then gave her the figure for coming back, and neither of them was any use. Alice took 3 breads off the tray for one breakfast. Nora watched her do it and said nothing. 3 chairs were empty at that table now. Maria was somewhere past the mountain with the metal slime, and would be for another week and a half, and that had been agreed and priced, and was going to be fine. She had already been down to the gate once before breakfast, for nothing. Patrols were manageable, and Hugo could hold the town without her, so she took the 16th floor instead, with Victoria and the Red Ogre. By then the Heavy had gauntlets on, adamantine alloy out of Wallace's benches, which raised what it could put out and did not break when it did. They reminded her of a film she had seen a long way from here. She did not explain the reference to anybody, and nobody asked her to. The 16th floor was a town, and the town had burned. Nothing stood above the first story. The timber had gone to charcoal and kept its shape, so the streets were still streets, and at the far end of them, there was a collapsed keep, which was where they were going. First out were slimes made of blue flame, gaseous, and hot enough that Victoria would not go near them. She extended her reach and cut them from a distance instead. Nora used force, which worked and was not elegant. Past the first wall, it was burning armor carrying wave-bladed swords, sleeker than the ones she already owned. She looked at those swords for about 2 seconds, and then left them where they fell, because everything in Emberhold above the foundations is made of wood. The Heavy walked into the burn damage, went through the middle of the group, and out-healed what the fire did to it while it worked. They took them one at a time and collected the shards. At the keep, the great door was half destroyed, and wide enough to walk through. Nora put a hand flat on what was left of it. "I hope it's a useful boss." Victoria pointed out that there was nowhere else in the world where a person says that before opening a door like that one. The Heavy nodded. Nora told it that it was right. Inside the wall, there was mounted armor, burning, larger than any cavalry either of them had fought. Victoria took them off their mounts with flying cuts and never came to a stop. Again, they took nothing that burned. Upper floors were not reachable, stairs gone and walls gone, so they went for the courtyard instead, through fire bats and more armor and blades moving on their own, and 2 golems. Victoria complained about the heat the entire way. Nora walked through it under an aura, perfectly comfortable, which Victoria also complained about. The kitchen had vegetables in it, roots and crops neither of them had ever seen, dry and intact under the ash. She bagged 10 kinds for Wallace to look at and left the meat where it was. There was a mid-boss in the kitchen, and it was made of ice, which was the first sign. Victoria said afterwards that it had been strong. She had ended it before Nora finished agreeing. Out the back door, the whole yard was ice. A war had been fought on this floor between the fire and the ice ice had won it. The plaza behind the keep was scattered with what was left of the other side. Then the queen came across it at them, with her attendants behind her. Nora tamed her on the way in and asked her, in the same breath, to help Victoria finish the rest. The appraisal said she had been the queen of a kingdom that froze, that she had frozen with it, and that what she was now she had become out of regret. It said she would keep coming back for as long as her ice held, so Nora arranged for the ice. Victoria went and stood near the last of the flames to warm up, and complained about that as well. The queen went into an ice store under the kitchens that evening, and by the next morning she was flash freezing fruit, which turned out to be the best thing anybody had done with fruit since the town was founded. Everything off the floor went to Wallace and the dwarves. Nora ate, went down to the bathhouse, thought about the wine stock, and remembered that Marcus was due. In the morning, it was her and Alice at the table. Victoria and Hugo had been out since first light with the children, because the mothers off the intake were working the fields and the kitchens, and somebody had to have the children. She said Emberhold should build a proper orphanage, and that Hugo should probably run it. Alice was still writing that down when Hugo came in. Marcus was on the road. He would be at the gate inside the hour. He was early. In all the time Nora had known him, Marcus had never once been early. The caravan came up the southern road at the pace of the slowest wagon, and Nora counted it out of habit as it came. 11 wagons, which was normal. Marcus at the front, walking the last stretch, which was also normal. And at the back, behind the final wagon, and traveling with an escort of its own, a carriage that had not been in his caravan the last time. He greeted her the way he always did, at volume and with both hands, and asked after the shopland and the children and the bathhouse before she could get a word in. He had heard about the bathhouse. He wanted to know who had paid for it, and looked genuinely unsettled when she told him. She asked him why he was early. Marcus stopped talking for a second, which was new, and then said he had an urgent purchase to make. Then he asked her to hear the whole of it before she answered any part of it. What he told her took about 2 minutes. His news was the war, and the war was going badly. Not the way it had been going badly when he was last here. Fronts coming apart in 3 places, whole districts given up, and a crown that had spent the year telling everybody the situation was contained. That crown had started placing its royal children with other powers, sons and daughters sent out to margraves, to allied crowns, to anybody with walls and a reason to keep them standing. The third son had no placement. Marcus went through where they had tried. It was a long list, and every name on it had said no. Some of them had said no politely. Nobody would take him. So Marcus had taken him because somebody had to, and then he had spent 9 days deciding where to bring him. He said he had brought him here. Then he turned and signaled down the line, and one of his people put a step down at the carriage door. The door opened. A man came down, in his early 20s, carefully, with a hand from one of his own staff. He straightened up on her road and looked at the wall and the gate and the town behind them without letting anything show on his face. He was dressed for a court 400 miles away. Behind him came 20 knights and 5 attendants, down off the carriage and the escort wagons in order, and they formed up on the road without being told to. 26 people, counting him. He came forward 3 steps and stopped at what was clearly the correct distance, and spoke like a man who had been practicing the words in a carriage for 9 days. I am Romeo, 3rd son of the Helios kingdom. I am asking for asylum. I have nothing to offer for it that you would want. I am asking anyway. She told them to come inside the gate rather than stand out in the road, and they came, and the knights arranged themselves behind him again in the yard. Then he asked, because Marcus had never actually said it, whom he had the honor of addressing. My name is Nora. I am the head of the overruled kingdom. She did not add anything to it. One of the knights looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the ground in front of his own boots and had stopped moving his hands, which in all the time she had known him had not happened once. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anybody. He bowed then, fully, from the waist, and was slow coming back up out of it. Nobody in the yard said anything for a while. Then Nora asked whether any of them had eaten. None of them had. They had come straight through from the last village since before first light. Alice came down from the castle with a board under her arm and did the rest of it. You carry the indemnity, she said to Marcus. If anything happens to him inside our border, no claim comes to us. Not from you and not from his family. Marcus agreed to that. He will be housed well. He will not be housed best. The best house in this town is occupied, and I am not moving anybody out of it. Agreed. Alice turned the board round so he could read the 3rd line while she said it. His people live under our law. All of it. The same as everybody who has come through that gate before them. There is nothing written into it for guests, and I am not writing anything in now. Marcus said that was acceptable, and that he wanted it minuted that he had said so. We feed them, Alice said. The cost will be on a page before your wagons leave. Send it to me. Send it to me every month. Then he said the thing he had come to say, and he said it standing where the prince could hear all of it. I have been up and down this continent for 20 years, Marcus said. I have looked at every wall on it. This is the safest place I could have brought him, and I want that said out loud so that nobody has to wonder later what I thought I was doing. Nora accepted them. It was trouble. 26 people who had never worked a day, an escort with opinions of its own, and a name a good deal of the continent would like to have the location of. Measured against the rest of what was on her desk that week, it was entirely manageable. She asked Alice which houses were standing empty. Alice had been counting since the carriage came through the gate and said 3, and that 2 of the 3 were finished. The knights carried their own trunks in off the road because nobody had come out to do it for them. For a second, watching that, she thought about a tree line a long way from here and how long she had stood in it before she started walking. Then she went to find Hugo about the beds. Marcus got his urgent purchase that afternoon. It was ballistas, and he paid the price as it was written. The prince slept inside her wall that night. Nobody told him anything. 50 of them came in off the road before the sun was over the wall. Alice read the list and the names came back one at a time. A boy near the back had to answer twice because nobody heard him the first time. Nothing was missing off the bottom of the page, which had not been true of the last 3 intakes. Luggage went into the houses before anything else happened to anybody. That was the order Hugo had settled on months ago, and it went fast because there was not much luggage. Silas took them one at a time under the awning at the end of the row. He put a hand over each of them, and the light came and went, and he moved to the next one. All 50 were healthy. All 50 were thin. Thin was the only finding on the whole sheet, and the kitchens fixed thin in about a month. Then the entire intake went to the bathhouse, which was not phrased as a request. That took until the middle of the morning, and it was not the only thing happening. The second street had its last 4 roofs going on, and the dwarves wanted a decision on whether the gutters ran to the front or the back. 2 of the new families had children small enough that Hugo took their names for the day rota and walked off with one of them already on his hip. The kitchens sent a runner to say that 50 more at every sitting meant the second oven now, not in spring. A woman who had come in with the last intake stopped Nora on the step to say the ceiling in her house was fine, which was the whole reason she had stopped her. It was the 76th day since she had come to this world, and the 11th since the prince. Maria had walked back in well inside her half-month with Vaughn's people behind her. All of them fed, none of them harmed, on exactly the terms that had been agreed before she left. They were housed on the 2nd Street and on the work rota within the week. Solomon and Ethan came back off the demon continent 2 days after that, and Solomon brought a name and nothing else with it. The thing running the war had been a hero once and was called Light. He said in the hall that he did not know how to fight it. Nobody in the valley had an answer for him either, and after a while, the hall went back to the grain figures because there were a great many grain figures. Alice wanted 3 decisions before the sun cleared the roofs. The second row of houses, the winter grain, whether the new 50 came out of the same water allocation as the last 50. Nora gave her all 3 in under 2 minutes, and Alice wrote them down without looking up. "Wagons are in," Alice said, shutting the book against her hip. "He came in the dark to get here for the opening of the yard." Marcus had 11 wagons standing in the yard, and he wanted every one of them full. He bought wall engines. Alice had the price written on the board where it had been written the last time, and he did not look at it for long. He offered a third over it. Then, he asked to be moved up the queue ahead of 2 orders that were already promised. This was a man who had once spent 11 minutes arguing with her about a sack of onions. He did not argue now. He asked twice how soon. Alice took the extra without blinking and told him the second half would follow next season. Marcus said he wanted it sooner than next season, and he said it in the same voice he used for weather. His boarders were going then. Nora put it together, standing there with her hand on a wagon rail, and did not say a word about it because he would have answered, and he would have had to hear himself do it. Hugo came across the yard faster than Hugo ever moved. The watch network had it from the far markers, 200,000 out of the barrens, coming straight in on the eastern approach and already inside 2 hours. Marcus stopped with his hand halfway to a crate. She could have dealt with it quietly. Everybody standing in that yard knew she could, including him. She had done exactly that 4 times already, with nobody watching and nothing in the ledger afterward but a number. Instead, she turned to Hugo and gave him one instruction. "Take the Margrave and the prince to the top of the wall," she said. "It is the safest place in the town, and from up there, they will be able to see." Both halves of that were true. Hugo bowed and went to do it, and Alice was already writing the movement into the log, and Marcus did not ask a single question about any of it. Everything came at once. The walking mountain stood up out of the south pasture with a forest on its back and started east. Both rock dragons came around the outside of the wall from opposite directions and met on the road. The 2 frost dragons came down out of the cloud. The sealed dragon came up over the ridge behind the orchard, which meant somebody in the kitchens had gone and fetched it. The slime came last at a jog, because the slime always came last. Victoria arrived at Nora's elbow with her sword already out and asked whether she was wanted or whether she was watching. "Left of the line," Nora told her. "Do not get in front of the mountain." Then she rode out on the first one, not the biggest, not the newest. The rock dragon she had tamed in the last available second of her first day in this world, standing on open stone at the tree line with nothing else to her name. They went east together, and behind them, the gate closed, and on the top of the wall, a young man in a blue coat put both hands on the parapet. The horde came over the last rise in one piece, and the ground went dark from one edge of the plain to the other. Both frost dragons went first. The front of that advance stopped moving the way a river stops when it freezes, all at once and across its whole width. Everything behind it walked into the back of it, and the whole formation folded in on itself. Over the top of that came the sealed dragon, and it let go once. The line came apart down the middle. On the left, the slime took its giant form, and everything it fired came out bigger than it went in. Then, the two rock dragons and the mountain reached the front together. They fired in the same second, all three of them, one combined volley. When the dust came down, a third of the plain was bare ground. After that, it was weight and movement. The mountain walked. Both rock dragons went through what was left of the flanks at a pace that never changed once. Victoria took the left and did not need help with it. And out on the open ground, the dust got so high that from the wall, there was nothing to see but the mountain's back moving above it. Inside the town, the horses had to be held, and the water in the troughs would not sit still. The mountain fired one last time, and then there was nothing standing on the plain at all except one thing, out in the middle, that had taken every single one of those and was still there. Nora rode over and looked at it. It looked back. Tame. It came over. That was still the whole skill. She came up the stair afterward with the dust still on her. Hugo had the log open on the parapet and a pen out, and he asked her what to enter. 200,000, she said. No damage. Hugo wrote it down. Marcus had not stopped talking since the yard opened that morning. He did not say anything now. The prince stood a little apart with both hands flat on the stone, looking east at the plain. He did not say anything either. Nobody on that wall made him. He was still standing in the same place, with his hands in the same place, when she went back down the stair and out through the gate to see about the one that was left. The survivor stood in the pen, looking mildly inconvenienced. Her appraisal explained it in one line. Nothing thrown at it landed. Not fire, not frost, not corrosion, not anything that had to travel through the air to arrive. Only weight worked, and the mountain's volley had been aimed at everything else on the plain at the time, which was the only reason there was anything left in the pen to look at. She read the rest of it twice, because the rest of it was better. Against a thing you could not touch, and there were several of those on the lower floors that had cost her a full day each. This was worth more than any dragon she had, so she put it on a lower floor of the labyrinth to fish. The water down there had a fish in it the length of a cart, and the kitchens had been asking about that fish for a month. It could not get down the stairs by itself, so something else was given the job of carrying it. By evening, the strongest thing on the continent was standing knee-deep in a labyrinth lake, while a line of laborers explained the work to it. Marcus came and stood next to her at the rail and was quiet for a while, which she had not seen him do. Then he said, in the tone of a man floating something he had been carrying around for a day and a half, that he had been looking at the empty ground on the north side. He wondered aloud whether a man could put a house on it. Not a warehouse, a house. She would not have him, not yet. A Margrave does not move house, he defects. Taking a sitting Margrave off Alberia while Alberia was still standing would be read in a capital 400 miles away as an act of war. It would be read that way against a country that had never once done anything to her. It would cost her the road, the trade, and every neutral border she had. The day Alberia fell, she would take him inside the hour. Not one day before that. None of it reached her face, and none of it reached her mouth. She told him the north ground was good ground, and asked whether he was staying for supper. Hugo had 4 long tables up and loaded before the light went. It was 3 things at once, and everybody there knew it. A supper after an engagement, a welcome for the 50 who had come in that morning, and for the 26 who had come in 11 days before, and for a Margrave with 11 wagons, a demonstration of what this valley put on a plate. Alice walked the 2 of them through it like an ambassador, and she tailored it as she went. Marcus got the price of every dish, where the ingredients came from, and what it would cost to move a barrel of any of it to the coast. The prince got the names, and which house had made which one, and who he should thank on the way out. The 50 from that morning ate at the far end, and were told twice that there was more. Victoria worked steadily through a platter and contributed nothing to any conversation. At the far table, the dwarves were still on the question of the gutters. Partway through, Romeo stood up. He was not loud about it. He said he had been brought here without any say in the matter. He said he had spent that morning standing on a wall, watching what he had been brought to. And he asked that it be recorded, in front of everybody at the table, that he accepted he had been entrusted to the right hands. Then he sat down and went back to his food, and the table went back to being a table. Nora tried the sauce everyone had been going on about for a week and asked where it had come from. A kitchen hand told her it had been worked up from notes Ethan left with them before he went, and that the crew had spent a month getting it right. Ethan was 20 feet away on the serving line with an apron over one shoulder, doing the rice. Nobody at that table pointed it out. Nobody ever did. She said it was the best thing on the board and asked the kitchens for 2 variations by the end of the month, one for fish. Victoria put her hand up to test all of them. The wagons went out heavy the next morning. He had bought more than he came for, and he had paid every price as written, plus the third he had put on it himself. At the gate, he shook her hand the way he always did, with both of his. "If Alberia falls," she told him, "come here. Do not send word first, just come." Marcus looked at the road for a second, then said he would hold her to that, and climbed up beside his driver. She watched the wagons out of sight, then went into breakfast. Breakfast was soup, rice, and rolled egg, and it was a prince, an administrator, and a woman who had eaten raw meat in a forest for 8 days. Both of the other two ate impeccably. Alice had been raised to it, and the prince had been raised to it, and neither of them made a sound doing it. Nora had learned to eat with a bowl in her lap on wet ground, and had never entirely unlearned it. Romeo praised the egg twice, and smiled while he did it, which he had not done once in 11 days. Then, Alice put a sheet down beside his bowl. He was assigned to her, formally, in writing, starting that day. His 5 attendants went under her as well. Half his knights went on to the town patrol rota in rotation, taking the work the creatures were not suited to, which in practice meant fences, drink, lost children, and the road. The prince read it twice and asked what his title was. "Assistant," Alice said, and poured him more tea. He wrote his name at the bottom and asked no further questions. Nora went back to her soup. Alice took the sheet away to be copied before the egg was finished, and by midday, there were 3 copies of it, and one of them was pinned up in the guard room. Wallace issued the patrol kit that afternoon, standing on a crate and handing things down. The knights got holy blades, standard equipment, 1 each, off the rack, the same as everybody else on the rota. They did not take it well. Not badly, exactly, but not well. One of them held his at arm's length and turned it over twice, and then asked Wallace very quietly what he was supposed to do with it when he came off shift. "Hang it by your door," Wallace told him. The knight did not move for a moment. In the country, he came from a single one of those was a national asset, kept in a vault, brought out for coronations. He put it on his belt and went and stood with the others, and none of them said anything to each other for a while. Romeo watched the whole issue, and did not ask for one, and it visibly cost him something not to. So Wallace made him one, a short blade, 2 days later, decorated along the flat, because Wallace decided halfway through that a plain one would not do, with his name on the ricasso in small letters. The 3rd son of the Helios kingdom was delighted with it the way a boy is delighted with a toy. He wore it to supper. He wore it to breakfast. He was still adjusting the hang of it on his belt 3 days later at his own desk, in the middle of copying a grain schedule. 76 new residents needed placing, and there was work waiting for every one of them. Kitchens, food processing, sewing, which was 3 weeks behind, childcare, which was 4, the dwarves' benches, the fields, the second oven when it came. Alice started matching names to jobs that week and got through about a third of the list before the rest of the week happened to her. Nora raised the shops. The town needed them. 278 people could not go on drawing everything off a central store forever. Some of them had stopped waiting already. A woman on the 3rd street was trading eggs for mending at a rate she had invented herself, and 2 of the dwarves were running a debt against each other in beer that neither of them could account for. "Shops need money," Nora said, "which means I have to talk to you about money." She had a whole argument prepared for that. What to mint it out of, whether anybody would take it, whether they should just use Alberia's and let Marcus set the value. Alice opened a drawer and put a cloth bundle on the desk. They were already struck, all of them. 3 metals and 3 denominations, a small, a middle, and a large, with the exchange set at 10 and 10, because Alice said anything cleverer than that would have to be explained to people twice. Prices were set against them down the whole store list, in her handwriting, dated. A loaf of the good bread cost one of the smallest coins. Trade with Alberia would go on by barter, which suited Marcus and suited the treasury both, and Alice would handle that end of it herself. Nora turned them over one at a time. The largest had her on it, from behind, one hand out toward a rock dragon on a patch of open ground. The middle one had the dragons. The smallest had the slime, who had not come out looking very much like herself, and who was reported to be thrilled about it regardless. Then Alice unwrapped the last piece and set it down on its own. It was bigger than the others and heavier, struck in deep-sea steel, and there were 5 of them in the world, and there would never be more. It was not for spending. It carried 4 faces on it: Solomon, Maria, Alice, small, over at the edge, and clearly against her own better judgment, and Nora. "Who decided that?" she asked. "I did." Alice squared the cloth up and did not apologize for any part of it. A state does not put out money with nobody on it. Then she went, with the price list under her arm, because the kitchens needed it before the evening service. She took the prince with her to carry the second copy. Nora stayed where she was and looked at the coin for a while. It was heavier than it looked. The steel had come out of a floor of the labyrinth. The dies had been cut by a dwarf out of a village that had voted, all of it, to move onto her ground. The faces on it belonged to a man from a clean, empty castle in the wasteland. A demon the rock dragon had carried home off the barrens, an administrator who was the last of a kingdom and ate 5 breads at a sitting, and her. 76 days ago, she had been walked out of a capital by 2 soldiers and left standing at a tree line, at the edge of a forest that nobody in that country went into on purpose. On her way out of the hall, a man in gray had read her appraisal aloud to the room. He had told them all that hers was the weakest job that exists. A clerk at the door had counted coin into a purse and handed it over without looking up from his book, and it had gone back down the corridor as mercy, repeated by everyone who passed it along. Nothing within a month's walk of that tree line would have taken one of those coins for a loaf of bread. The man who signed it had not thought about her since. She was fairly certain of that, because if he ever had, somebody would have come. She was holding the money now. She had made it. Her face was on it. Nobody in Helios knew any of it. She put the coin back down on the cloth and folded the corners over it and left it on Alice's desk where it belonged. Then she went to find Alice, because there were 76 new residents in this town, and most of them still had nothing written against their names, and that list was not going to finish itself.